The woman asked if the girl was ready to return, then she announced that the bet had been accepted. A few minutes later, the girl opened her eyes and heard a noise. She didn't understand where she was and believed that she was dead. The maid spoke joyfully, saying that everyone was happy to see their mistress conscious, but the girl only asked what had happened. She had absolutely no idea what was going on, who this girl was, or why they were calling her mistress. Unknown memories arose in her head, and a strange feeling told her that she needed to rest. But the maid persistently tried to wake her up and got an answer. At that moment, a gentleman entered the room, but he was immediately told that he should not come without warning. The maid tried to explain that the lady's condition was critical. The gentleman noted that he expected her to scream and try to throw objects at him as soon as she saw him. The main character looked at this man with horror. He seemed like a giant to her, so big that it was frightening. The maid informed the master that his wife had had an accident and that she needed time to recover. The gentleman merely chuckled, saying that she always behaved like that, and then added that my lady seemed to be pretending to be in love again. The girl was stunned when she realized this man was her husband. Meanwhile, he continued to say that he should have restrained himself, but now he wouldn't be coming to the mansion for a while. At that moment, she realized that she was definitely dead, but for some reason she now had a husband with whom she clearly didn't get along. She was overcome with despair. Something was clearly wrong. The maid tried to convince her mistress that she needed peace. Another servant noticed that the lady had recently been injured, so it was too early for her to get up. But the main character didn't listen. The memories of another person continued to pop up in her head. She had silver hair that fell like golden silk to her waist and bright, expressive eyes. And suddenly she remembered her name. Loporam. She was the most beautiful lady of the empire, the famous Duchess of Loporam, a mother who neglects her son, the young protagonist of the novel Torn Wings. It seemed impossible, but it seemed like she had become a character in a book she had once read. However, she tried to calm down, no matter how incredible it sounded. But she didn't understand how this happened because this girl is hardly mentioned in the plot. She actually played the role of the main character's mother and is currently unable to sleep, possibly due to pain. If all this is true, then she will have to live here. Suddenly it occurred to her that she would actually have to stay here. She didn't understand why she became the mother of the main character and not a secondary character. Her son was completely insane. He killed people more than once. He could even kill her if she interfered with him even a little. She remembered several scenes with him from the original work. He told one girl that if she wanted to leave, she could do as she wished because he was generous. However, if he catches her, she must be prepared for the consequences. Her legs will be chained in iron so that she can never escape again. The protagonist of such novels usually becomes that way because of his upbringing, especially if he has cruel parents. In such cases, he gets rid of everyone who irritates him. This means that he definitely had a bad father, and therefore his mother was not the best either. The girl became hysterical. At first, she thought she simply had a bad relationship with her husband, but now it turned out that her son was a psychopath, obsessed with the main character. If she wants to survive, she needs to improve her family relationships before it's too late. But who's better to start with? The problematic husband, or the son she hasn't remembered for years? In the morning, she heard someone outside and she became curious about who it was. She looked out and saw a boy. He was very cute. And then she thought, if this boy appeared in her memories, it means she knows who he is. This charming child is her future psychopathic son. She had never seen such cute young protagonists, so she couldn't help but admire them. This world seemed strange to her, because in the novella it was completely different. She decided that it was better to deal with a cute child than with a frightening husband. After all, the boy looked so nice. But she still had to think about where to begin. The next day, the maid informed her mistress that breakfast was ready and it was time to get up. She suggested that the lady was feeling better, and the girl confirmed this. The maid noted that the mistress should not worry about the affairs of the mansion for some time. It would be better to recover. After this, the lady turned to Margot and asked how many days she was unconscious after the incident. The maid reported that this had been going on for several days, and the mistress noticed that, despite this, she did not feel rested and was recovering slowly. The maid said that the incident was serious, and there was nothing surprising about it. Everyone thought that she was seriously injured and were beside themselves with worry. Who would have thought that the carriage would get into an accident? The lady nodded, saying she understood. After all, her husband had visited her, despite their strained relationship. She hadn't heard anything about her son, so she turned to the maid and asked if Karditzel was busy at the moment. The maid was embarrassed but confirmed it. As expected, everything turned out worse than the mistress had imagined. But she wasn't going to sit idly by, so she immediately asked where her son was now. The maid reported that the young master was now in the garden, and it seemed that the mistress was going to meet him. In the novel, Karditzel was completely incapable of understanding the feelings of others, but now he was much younger. She definitely should have made the first move. Even though she was scared, there was no point in postponing the meeting. That way they would quickly realize how damaged their relationship was. But it will take a long time to restore them. The maid apologized for saying something stupid. Then she wished the lady a pleasant rest. But the lady got out of bed and asked her to stop. She said that she wanted to see something and asked the maid to take her to the garden. The maid noted that this was not possible, since the mistress had not yet fully recovered. The lady smiled and assured that everything would be fine, adding that she hoped for her help. The maid replied that, of course, she agreed and would immediately begin preparations. Before meeting Karditzel, the garden looked amazingly beautiful. In the novel, it was covered with thorny vines to prevent the heroine from escaping. She wanted to ask again where exactly Karditzel was now, but suddenly she noticed him herself. She was delighted to see the boy. He was so cute that her heart involuntarily sank. He sat at the table and ate something with obvious pleasure. He seemed to like it, but it would be hard to find a person who doesn't like sweets. In the novel, Sheriel somehow completely forgot about such a lovely child. The boy himself, noticing his mother, looked puzzled. He had a very sweet face. He looked exactly like in the novel. She really wanted to go up to him and wipe his face. It was all covered in cream. But suddenly, the boy turned in her direction, hearing a rustling in the bushes. Sheriel told Margot that it looked like they had been discovered. The boy loudly declared that he could hear them, and then the lady came out to him. She greeted him, and he immediately asked what she was doing there. She said she was just taking a stroll in the garden and asked if he would mind if his mother joined him for tea. The guy was silent at first, then sighed and started to walk away. The lady wasn't quite sure what was happening or where he was going. She was upset because it looked like he was going to run away from her, but she couldn't let that happen. She grabbed him by the sleeve and asked him to wait. She looked at the boy, hoping that he would spare her at least a minute. He looked at her strangely but said nothing. Finally, he said that it wasn't so, pushed her away, and added sharply that he didn't need a mother. The lady was shocked. She couldn't even imagine how unsuitable she was for him. When he started to run, she tried to stop him, calling out, but he didn't turn around. Suddenly, the boy caught on a rock and fell. She immediately rushed to him, but he shouted at her to go away and not pretend to be kind. He said that he knew the truth, but the lady asked him to wait. He had a scrape on his knee, and his mother would help. He started shouting, demanding that she move away. After all, she herself said that she didn't need him. He rose with difficulty, in tears, but left anyway. The servants immediately ran up to him, worried, and warned him that it was dangerous to run like that. The lady was shocked and did not understand what to do next. In the evening, she looked out the window, and her heart felt sad. It looked like her son had been hurt badly, and she didn't know if he would be okay. Besides, he seemed to hate her much more than she thought, and that was a serious problem. He probably wouldn't return to kindergarten tomorrow. She felt like she deprived her son of his only place to rest. Karditzel must have been very surprised by such an unexpected change in his mother. She needed to figure out how to get closer to him, but not as abruptly as she tried today. She asked Margot if she was there. The maid confirmed, and the mistress asked that the letter be delivered to her son. Margot was surprised and asked again, but the lady insisted. Even though it was late, the letter still had to reach him. She sincerely wants to improve her relationship with Karditzel. The maid was delighted and assured her that her mistress could rely on her. She promised that the letter would be delivered safe and sound. In the morning, the boy woke up and saw the gift again. He couldn't understand why she kept sending him all this unnecessary junk. Today, there was a teddy bear in the box. There was also a letter in which his mother asked how he slept. She noted that the weather was nice today, ordered his favorite desserts to be prepared, and wrote that he could rest peacefully in the garden. She would not disturb him. She also asked about his knee. He remembered telling her she irritated him, and now he couldn't understand why she kept sending him such letters. The servant was surprised to see that the young master had already woken up. Karditzel shuddered. trying to hide his excitement, and began to hide the letter so that no one would notice it. He threw away all the gifts, but left the letters, and the servant noticed this perfectly. The butler, hearing the door creak, thought that the gentleman would wake up again and assumed that he needed help changing his clothes. But the boy replied that he could handle it himself. Then the servant asked what to do with the teddy bear. Karditzel was silent at first, concentrating on sorting through his clothes. Only a minute later he said that he could throw the toy away again, but so that the lady would not see it. However, at the last moment, the boy changed his mind, stopped him, and asked him to wait. He told him to throw out only the box and leave the teddy bear in the room. The servant smiled and remarked that the young master seemed to really like the gift. But Karditzel quickly objected, saying that it wasn't the mother's fault at all. He simply liked the toy. The butler nodded and assured that he would only throw away the box. Then, the boy suddenly hesitated and asked the servant to stay, as he wanted to ask for something. Sheriel was delighted to see her son had replied. She immediately called Margot. The maid, noticing her mistress's joy, also rejoiced and congratulated her on the letter. Everyone was curious about what he had written. Sheriel unfolded the paper and was surprised by its contents. The letter said only one thing: no more gifts or messages. As expected, she seemed to have jumped the gun. Margot was upset, but tried not to show it. The lady sighed and said it was all right. She hadn't expected immediate success. Moreover, she emphasized, it was written beautifully, and this proved that her son was very smart. Margot agreed, noting that the letter was indeed neat and that the young gentleman was a quick learner. Despite everything, Sheriel was overjoyed. After all, this was the first time her son had written to her himself. The maid assumed that Karditzel simply didn't know her well enough yet. After all, her mistress hadn't shown any interest in him before. It might have been untimely, but she was still glad to see Sheriel smile, as she had looked distant since her arrival. The heroine thought, did that mean she had never smiled before? Did that mean she hadn't even laughed in the Duke's house? Remembering those around her, she realized that their faces were also always gloomy. They seemed to be concerned not with her condition, but with what she might do to them. It filled her with a strange sadness. It was as if she were looking at her former self from the outside. Surprisingly, she had no memories of her life in the duchy. Perhaps I should have asked Margot about this. The maid noticed her mistress's gaze and looked at her with bewilderment. But Sheriel decided there was no need to rush. First and foremost, she needed to focus on her son. She sighed and wondered if Karditzel would stop hating her if she became closer to him. Margot confidently replied, yes. Perhaps it was worth trying to meet him in person. However, the lady had doubts. What if he gets hurt again, like last time? Besides, they didn't even know where he was now. But the maid only looked at her in surprise. After all the maids knew that the young master had been going into the garden a little earlier than usual lately. Margot thought her mistress had noticed it too. Sheriel was shocked. But then she remembered that she had promised not to disturb her son in the garden anymore. The maid remarked that she was sure the young master wanted to see his mistress too. She promised to help her prepare, so they had to go quickly. They got ready and left. Sheriel pretended she had no choice, but deep down, she was still unsure whether she should do it. She thought about what to say when they met. Walking a little forward, she saw her son sitting on a bench. Karditzel was indeed there, and he noticed her too. She came closer and asked how his wound was. The boy waved his hand dismissively, saying that she was fine. As Sheriel moved closer, she noticed that he had treated the wound. This made her very happy. He had been sitting in the garden for a long time, but still hadn't touched the desserts. She wondered if he was expecting something. So she decided to ask again. The boy was silent at first, then embarrassedly said that he had not been expecting her at all. Sheriel noted that she was sure he thought she wouldn't come today. Karditzel replied that he was here almost always and saw no point in leaving just because someone had come here. Did this mean she could come to him? But the boy immediately denied it. He was still cautious, but he didn't leave. Sheriel felt relieved. She asked again if she could just take a look. The boy, embarrassed, stared at his plate. His silence was a sign of consent, and the lady was pleased. She thanked him and promised not to interfere. Now that he had started eating, Sheriel thought that perhaps he trusted her at least a little. They say children are good at sensing people. Today, Karditzel seemed especially sweet. A week later, the lady began to think. She had hardly participated in social life, but the invitations still came without end. She invariably responded to them with a polite refusal. There was no need for social events now. She didn't have time for them, and they generally irritated her. It was much more pleasant to simply watch her son in the garden. One more answer, and the invitations will finally be over. The maid remarked that the mistress had done a good job, and then cautiously asked if she could ask a question, if the mistress did not mind. Shiriel nodded, and Margot noticed that she had been making an obvious effort to get closer to the young master lately. Shiriel replied that she seemed to be doing well, but the maid noticed that she had some entries in her diary, including surveillance footage of those who hate her. The mistress didn't understand why the maid thought so. She was simply writing down everything she found endearing about Karditzel. Be that as it may, the maid believed that the mistress should only respond to truly important invitations. Shiriel wondered what she should write in her diary today. When they were dating, she always wrote down everything she found touching. For her, this was completely normal. In her diary, she noted that Karditzel was silent when she came, and that it was very sweet. She also wrote that the boy ignored her when she tried to talk, which she also found charming. And today, he even nodded when she greeted him. He declined all her gifts, but according to the maids, he did take a liking to the teddy bear. Moreover, he even replied to her letters, and that was incredibly sweet. Margot noticed that her mistress was literally glowing with happiness. Then, the maid remarked with a smile, since she was writing so much about how sweet the young master was, perhaps she should show these notes to Karditzel himself. She didn't expect the lady to agree, but suddenly Shiriel really started to think about it. She asked again if Margot was sure that this was a good idea and whether it could help them get closer. The maid was in complete shock. The mistress not only agreed, but was fired up by the idea. She thought this was a great opportunity to chat with the young master. Shiriel was clearly out of her mind, but she still thought it was a brilliant plan. She thanked Margot warmly and promised that she would return soon. Now she was unbearably tormented by curiosity. What did the young master's room look like? She had never been there, but he was still a child, so everything had to look really cute. I wonder what color his walls are. There were probably a lot of toys there, and it must have been charming, no doubt. It was even scary to knock, but, gathering her courage, she knocked anyway. I tried to calm myself down and breathed evenly. She knocked again and suddenly heard the boy's voice asking who was there. She was scared because he answered so quickly. After this, the boy opened the door and remarked that he had asked who it was. The lady sat down next to him and greeted him. He immediately started to run away, but Shiriel stopped him, saying that she had come to show him something important. The boy looked out from behind the door and looked at her carefully. She felt embarrassed. He looked incredibly cute. He reluctantly let her in, noting that he was in a good mood today because of the chocolate he had eaten. This was not what she expected at all. The room turned out to be dark and gloomy, but she noticed that the teddy bear she had given him was lying next to him, and that made her happy. The boy immediately grabbed the toy and began to hide it, muttering that he simply didn't want to throw it away. Then he crossed his arms over his chest and asked what exactly she wanted to show him. The lady carefully handed him the diary, explaining that she had written it personally and offered to read it. The boy took the diary, frowned with displeasure, but began to read anyway. His face slowly lengthened, and then he exclaimed, "What is this?" He was so angry that he even wanted to burn the diary. At this moment, Duke Loperam's special skill, Wings of Darkness, manifested itself. The family book stated that only the one who inherited this gift could become the heir. Karditzel owned him, and the lady was genuinely happy. Her son was truly special, but she felt sorry for the diary, because now it was burning in his hands. The boy lowered his head and muttered that he didn't want to do it, but Shiriel reassured him, saying it was okay. If he didn't like it, she wouldn't keep the diary anymore. But the boy suddenly asked why she called him that. The lady did not immediately understand what he was talking about, and he, without raising his eyes, quietly said that she had called him not Karditzel, but Cardi. She considered this, wondering if perhaps he didn't like the abbreviation, but the boy didn't look angry. He just quietly repeated the name. Then the lady asked if he wanted her to call him that. She smiled. How could this innocent child become a tyrant in the future? She doesn't want him to hurt others, to hurt the Duchess. If he is loved, he will learn to love himself, and then in the future he will become different. Therefore, from now on, she will become a real mother to him. The boy nodded and said he agreed. Then Shiriel asked again if he could spend at least 10 minutes a day with his mother. He was confused and did not understand why this was necessary. Then she gently apologized for talking about it so late. but she wanted to teach him something important: how to treat people with respect, how to love and care for others. After all, no one had ever explained such things to him before. After a short silence, the boy reluctantly agreed, clarifying that he was only willing to devote 10 minutes. Cheryl smiled, thanked him, and promised she wouldn't disappoint. An incredibly wonderful child. She didn't understand how he turned into a tyrant, depriving others of freedom. And all because no one cared about him. So he didn't know what it meant to be loved and to love. If you raise Cardicel properly, he won't grow up like he did in the original story. The boy narrowed his eyes and asked what she was up to, as she looked worried. The lady replied thoughtfully that she was trying to decide where to begin. She asked him what he would do if he caught a beautiful bird. The boy answered without hesitation that he would first build a secure cage for her. The lady smiled and said that it was wonderful that he wanted to give the bird a home. But the boy immediately added that if he liked the bird, he would close it so that it could never fly away. Hearing this, the lady was horrified and did not know how to react. She tried to explain that if she was locked in, she would try to escape at the first opportunity. Whatever one may say, something in him from childhood hinted at his future character. The boy noticed her confusion and asked why his mother was silent. The lady smiled tensely and said she was simply surprised at how deeply he thought. Then she suggested that they read a book together next time, and the boy reluctantly agreed. The lady couldn't understand where she had made a mistake. Was he really like this from the very beginning? She felt that the situation was much more complicated than it seemed, and now she did not know how to properly raise this child. Suddenly, a maid burst into the room, and the mistress reproachfully told her not to frighten her so much. Margot justified herself by saying that she had called her several times, but she had not answered, and so she decided that something was bothering the lady. After all, she had a sad expression on her face. The lady immediately remembered that incident with her son when he burned her diary. It's a little sad to remember, but Margot would rather not know about it. The maid assumed that the mistress was worried about the Duke's imminent return. Cheryl was surprised and asked again, meaning the tall, handsome man she met on the day of her rebirth? It was her husband and Cardicel's father. Both parents are responsible for raising a child, so perhaps this was a chance to bond with him naturally. Of course, the Duke still frightened her, but now the lady was thinking only about how to improve the relationship between her sweet son and his father. She turned to Margot and asked when exactly the Duke would return. The maid replied that unless there were any unforeseen circumstances, then in 2 days, and then added that her next question might sound rude. She was curious if the lady was going to hide when the master returned. The lady looked at her in surprise. Not understanding what she was getting at, Margot noticed that her mistress had been thinking a lot about the young master lately. It brought the mansion to life, and the maid was sincerely grateful for it. She decided to ask her mistress for a favor, but she couldn't understand where she got her courage from. Cheryl was surprised, looking at the maid, full of enthusiasm. Margot admitted that she had no right to ask for such a thing, but she still said, "When the gentleman returns, let the lady greet him at least once, just for the sake of decency." Cheryl was taken aback by her words. It was unexpected, as she hadn't even considered such a thing, not considering it could be of any importance to others. She tried not to think about it, because she hadn't even realized how cold her relationship with her husband had been before. She didn't think anything needed to change. Margot realized she might have been too harsh. The last few days had been so joyful that she wanted to express her thoughts, but perhaps she'd gone too far. She decided not to hide her feelings while in her mistress's presence. But if there was a punishment for this, then so be it. Her words were spoken sincerely, without malice. Cheryl didn't immediately understand what this was all about. Of course, she would agree to greet her husband when he returned. There was nothing complicated or special about it. Margot knew she'd gone too far, but she still listened carefully to her mistress's words. She didn't mean to seem presumptuous, but she spoke only with good intentions. Family discord is always a difficult ordeal for a child. So Cheryl simply looked at the maid and asked why she was still standing there, not leaving. Margot quickly realized that she needed to warn all the servants of her mistress's decision. If Cheryl really intended to greet the Duke, it was important for the servants to know in advance. She won't allow her sweet little son to turn into a bloody tyrant. She will do everything in her power to prevent this from happening, despite her past mistakes. Margot couldn't hide her delight. She felt as if she were facing a completely different person. She couldn't believe her mistress had actually made such a decision, so unexpected for everyone. The maid didn't hesitate. She rushed to share the news with all the servants, barely containing her excitement. Such an event couldn't go unnoticed in the mansion. Sheriel decided that since the servants were preparing for the Duke's arrival, she should also finish her chores. Paperwork doesn't wait, and ordering documents is no less important than anything else. She was about to begin, but suddenly stopped. A strange thought occurred to her. She didn't even know her husband's name. This fact confused her a little. Meanwhile, on the road, one of the servants cautiously approached the master. He asked if everything was all right, noticing that he didn't look his best. The Duke slowly turned his head in his direction. There wasn't a shred of joy in his eyes. He replied curtly that he didn't want to go back at all, but he had no choice. The man was certain that all his anxiety was connected with his mistress. This thought haunted him, but he didn't know what exactly was troubling him so about this sudden return. However, he quickly realized that such questions could get him into trouble, so he quickly apologized, deciding it wasn't worth delving into further. The Duke was tired of all this fuss. He'd had enough of worrying. They were almost there, and he considered it pointless to waste time on conversations that were leading nowhere. He knew he'd have to knock on doors again, but it was unlikely the lady would be in the mansion. She'd never met him before, and he saw no reason why anything would change now. But when the carriage stopped, all the servants suddenly appeared before him. They were standing at the entrance, as if they had been waiting for his return for a long time, which was completely unusual. He couldn't understand what was happening. Why were all the servants outside? This had never happened before. Usually, no one came out to greet him except the butler. But that wasn't even the strangest thing. The Duke was stunned to see his wife among the people standing before him. It was the last thing he expected. Sheriel took a few steps forward, approaching him. He couldn't hide his surprise as he watched her. She looked different from how he remembered her. The woman smiled slightly and calmly said that she had been waiting for him. Her voice sounded so natural, as if she had truly intended to meet him from the very beginning. The Duke was so stunned that he even glanced at his assistant. It all seemed strange, and he began to doubt the reality of what was happening. He confidently declared that he was most likely just delirious. It would be best to call the paramedics as soon as they were inside, as he couldn't explain what was happening any other way. But the knight merely replied that the true mistress stood before him. However, the Duke continued to believe it was merely a trick of his mind. The lady did not understand what was wrong with the Dukes and noticed that there was a rather cold wind today, so she suggested that they return home as soon as possible. The Duke looked at his wife with distrust. He was curious about what she had planned this time. She had never shown any interest in him before, and now she was greeting him in person. Sheriel wasn't quite sure why he was looking at her like that. She assumed he must be very tired after the journey and remarked that he should rest. She suggested they skip the street and go inside. Besides, standing outside for too long probably wouldn't do him any good. After all, she was waiting for him. He couldn't quite grasp that it was his wife standing before him. The last time he saw her, she'd been in an accident. Perhaps she had memory problems. Sheriel looked at him as if expecting an answer, then ordered the servants to prepare his favorite dishes. He was probably hungry after the journey and wanted to eat. She also reminded Margot of her earlier request. Important things are best kept under control, especially when the house is full of servants and guests. When there was no one left around, Sheriel quietly asked Margot to leave them so they could talk alone, without prying ears. She looked around and noticed the bustle of the mansion. Everyone was busy preparing, cleaning the rooms, setting the table. It seemed unusual. The Duke couldn't help but notice that Sheriel was smiling. This surprised him, as she had never acted like this in his presence before. Something had changed. He placed his hand lightly on her shoulder, trying to gauge her reaction. She flinched, but didn't pull away. Then he asked what she wanted from him. Sheriel calmly remarked that they should eat first. After all, that was why they were heading to the dining hall now. The Duke knew her words sounded logical, but deep down he couldn't believe that this was actually happening. He looked at his wife intently, as if trying to unravel her secret. However, nothing unusual would likely happen in the dining room. Sheriel confirmed his guess, and added that she simply thought that perhaps he would not want to wait long for the servants to finish their preparations. Sheriel decided not to delay the matter and suggested they hurry. There was no more time to think, and she had no intention of putting off the conversation. The Duke was momentarily taken aback by her unexpected directness. He wasn't used to seeing her like this. But she, oblivious to his confusion, calmly declared that she wanted to talk. Hearing this, the Duke instantly became wary. He was sure there was something more behind it. The thought flashed through his mind that she was up to something strange again. Sheriel never made idle conversation without a reason. She only communicated when it brought her some benefit, so his suspicions only grew. Besides, he knew his wife hated him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was about to happen, like she'd say something unexpected and then die. But he couldn't simply ignore a woman who had been preparing for this meeting since morning. He decided to be patient and at least hear her out. Sheriel knew that if she didn't pull herself together now, the moment would be lost, and she might never get a second chance, so she needed to say it right now. She found it difficult to start a conversation. She knew she had to lay the groundwork first to get the conversation going, otherwise he'd cut her off right away. The Duke noticed her hesitation, but still asked what exactly she wanted to say. He was clearly losing his patience, but he tried to maintain his composure. He impatiently asked her not to drag it out and just tell him everything at once. He didn't like being kept waiting, especially when it came to Sheriel. She thoughtfully remarked that she was wondering if he'd had a hard time at work and how the journey had gone. After all, it had been a long journey, and perhaps it hadn't been easy for him. The Duke immediately became wary. Sheriel didn't usually speak like this. He immediately realized something was wrong and began to suspect she was up to something. The Duke considered this for a moment, but ultimately decided that perhaps she was simply trying to show her concern. Although he found it hard to believe she was genuinely concerned about him, he slowly put his fork aside, looked at her carefully, and asked if she was really worried or if this was just another game on her part. He then remarked dryly that she would probably be much happier if he never returned, or at least got injured while staying somewhere longer. Sheriel flushed at his words. She couldn't let him think that way, and immediately, with indignation in her voice, she declared that she had never wished anything like that on him. The Duke calmly noted that there was something odd about her behavior. She was doing something she hadn't done before and trying to hold herself too evenly, as if she had been preparing for this conversation in advance. But she had expected such a reaction and was prepared for resistance. So, gathering her thoughts, she tried not to lose her composure and continued with what she had planned. She firmly stated that they had a son, but the Duke seemed confused as to where she was heading. He frowned slightly, wondering where this conversation would lead. Then Sheriel clarified that she wanted to talk about Carticel, specifically about his upbringing. They both needed to pay more attention to him, otherwise it would affect the child. The Duke rose slowly, sighing heavily. He was tired of this conversation, which in his opinion had been started not because of the child, but for some other reason. He reminded her that just recently she had openly declared that she hated him, so why had she now suddenly decided that they should raise their son together? She had indeed behaved differently after the accident, but he still couldn't believe it was the same Sheriel in front of him. However, she insisted she was fine. She insisted that they simply discuss the matter calmly. After all, it was truly important, and there was no point in putting it off any longer. But the Duke merely shook his head, noting that it would be better if she didn't approach him. He still didn't trust her, and her sudden behavior seemed suspicious to him. The Duke looked at her with a cold, narrowed gaze and asked if she really thought he'd believe her feigned concern. It all seemed too forced. Sheriel sighed nervously and, with alarm in her voice, declared that she didn't understand what he was talking about. She wasn't pretending or trying to deceive him. It was all true. She tried to do everything she could for Carticel, but no matter how hard she tried, her efforts seemed insufficient. She couldn't achieve the desired result. She'd hoped to resolve this matter calmly simply by talking, but for some reason the Duke was angry. She couldn't understand why he wouldn't at least listen to her. It hurts her, but she won't allow her son to be sidelined in his own life. She's willing to do everything in her power for him. The Duke sighed wearily and coldly remarked that if she had nothing more to say, he would simply leave, since this conversation had no meaning for him. Sheriel didn't have time to finish what she wanted to say, so, realizing that he was leaving, she tried to stop him and asked him to listen to her until the end. In her haste, she rushed after him, but miscalculated her steps and suddenly stumbled, unable to keep her balance, and began to fall forward. The Duke, hearing a noise behind him, turned sharply and, before she hit the floor, managed to catch her, preventing her from falling. Sheriel quietly said that she understood how much she irritated him, but despite this, for the sake of their son, she still wanted to come to an agreement with him. She did everything she could, but she couldn't fight anymore. Her body weakened, and losing consciousness, she went limp in his arms. The Duke, alarmed by her condition, loudly ordered his servants to call a doctor immediately. The maids, realizing the gravity of the situation, immediately ran. Sheriel didn't have time to say everything she wanted. She was pierced by not only emotional but also physical pain, so much so that she couldn't even utter a word. The Duke carefully lowered her onto the bed, still puzzled by what could have caused her to faint. He looked at her carefully, trying to figure out what had happened. Sheriel, gradually coming to her senses, didn't understand why he'd asked such a question. She'd only wanted to have a normal conversation, but in return he'd responded with rudeness, which made her feel even worse. If such an angry look is directed at a person during dinner, and in complete silence, it is not surprising that someone might lose consciousness, unable to withstand the tension. She may not be his true wife, but the constant conflict is hard to bear. It's simply impossible to resist someone who radiates malice, and he's not even as sweet as her son. Sheriel, looking up with difficulty, asked him if he really felt such hatred towards her, because it seemed like so many years had passed, but he was still just as angry. The Duke merely coldly remarked that, in his opinion, the hatred between them was mutual, since she had repeatedly shown her feelings toward him. Her surprise seemed insincere, but Sheriel looked genuinely confused. She couldn't understand where he'd gotten such thoughts from. Why had he decided she hated him? Why did she even treat him like that? The Duke recalled that as soon as he got a little closer to her, she began screaming, fighting back, and even throwing pillows, as if he posed a threat to her. And now she was sitting in front of him, acting as if she didn't remember anything, pretending nothing had happened. It was strange, and made him suspicious. When he touched her hand, she let out a sharp cry. The Duke frowned, as he hadn't squeezed her tightly enough, and her reaction had been too sudden, as if she were in pain. The Duke misjudged his touch on her hand, and only now realized he'd hurt her. He noticed her skin was cold, which somehow alarmed him. He realized her hands were so icy, as if she'd been shivering for a long time. So, despite her possible disapproval, he decided to try to warm them up. Even if she was uncomfortable, he still insisted she wait a little while he warmed her palms. She shouldn't remain in this state, since the doctor hadn't arrived yet. Sheriel said nothing, simply looking at him with interest. She hadn't expected such concern, and it left her with a strange feeling of bewilderment. But she didn't argue with him. The Duke merely calmly remarked that the most important thing now was patience. The doctor would be here soon, and then it would be clear what was wrong with her. For now, she should simply rest. Soon the doctor ran into the room, followed by the maids. They immediately began asking their mistress about her well-being, and the doctor began his examination without wasting a second. The Duke didn't linger. He was about to leave, and with one last glance at his wife, he told her to simply rest and not make any sudden movements until the weakness passed. However, despite her weakness, Sheriel tried to stop him. Meanwhile, the doctor warned her not to overexert herself, otherwise her condition could worsen. But that wasn't what upset her. They hadn't even had time to have a proper conversation. She wanted to discuss something important, but everything was cut off again, as if he didn't care at all about her words. The men in this house seemed unbearable to her. They even refused the delicacies she'd prepared with love. How could anyone live with them if they were so cold? The next day when she woke up, she still felt unwell. Her head was spinning, her body felt weak, but the thought she had fallen asleep with wouldn't leave her. She wanted her son to grow up in a happy family. She wanted him to feel no tension between his parents, to know he was loved. But how could she achieve this? Sheriel couldn't understand how she could get closer to her husband when he avoided conversation. Their relationship felt like a rift that only grew deeper with each passing day. Sheriel didn't even want to try to change anything again, because any attempts she made only crashed against a wall of indifference. She didn't know what to do now or where to go next. Suddenly, she heard footsteps, and this surprised her. After all, she had specifically asked Margot not to let anyone in. Whoever it was, they had clearly entered the room without the maid's permission. If Margot couldn't stop the visitor, it was either her husband or Carticel. The servants wouldn't dare disobey her orders for anyone else. The thought that it could be her son instantly lifted her spirits. She even sat up in bed hoping to see him in front of her. Sheriel couldn't resist asking again if it was really Carticel who had come to see her. She hoped to hear his voice, which might allay her worries. At that moment, the door did indeed open, and her son appeared on the threshold. He held his favorite toy in one hand and waved at her with the other, confirming that it was indeed him. The moment she saw him, Sheriel felt a sense of relief in her soul. This was her dear son, her treasure, and she was simply happy to see him here. Carticel reported hearing from one of the maids that his mother had fainted. This news alarmed him, and he immediately decided to visit her. He couldn't sit quietly in his room knowing his mother was unwell, So he came here himself, without waiting for permission, because it was important to him to make sure she was okay. The boy was so caring that Cheryl couldn't contain her tenderness. Her heart sank with overwhelming emotion, and she was grateful to fate for such a son. Cardicel handed her his teddy bear, assuring her that when someone is sick, they should definitely eat well and have something warm nearby to feel better. Cheryl couldn't hide her joy. She warmly thanked her son for his care, realizing how caring and kind he was. He was the most precious person to her. Cardicel became deeply embarrassed, his face flushed, and he hastened to explain that this wasn't why he'd come to see his mother. He wanted her to know his visit wasn't connected to anything unusual. He continued that the maid had conveyed the request to him, and that was the only reason he had come. He hoped his words would clear up any misunderstandings that might have arisen. Despite her son's embarrassment, Cheryl was grateful for his attention. She was genuinely happy for his visit, even if he might have felt a little uncomfortable. But Cheryl couldn't understand why Cardicel was looking at her like that. She hadn't done anything to displease him or cause him any strange feelings, and that puzzled her a little. Cheryl tried to figure out what was making him look at her that way. She honestly couldn't understand what she'd done wrong to make him react so strangely and incomprehensibly. Cardicel, for his part, felt embarrassed and awkward. He hadn't expected his mother to thank him so warmly, and this left him somewhat uneasy. He wasn't prepared for such a reaction. The boy was quick to tell her not to touch him like that next time. It wasn't what he was used to, and he felt uncomfortable with the way his mother stroked him. Cheryl immediately apologized, promising that next time she would try to be more restrained and not do anything that might embarrass her son. She didn't want to worry him. But Cardicel, with concern in his voice, added that if she was so tired that she fainted, she shouldn't eat at the same table with her father. This worried him greatly. He expressed his concern, and this became the cause of his anger. He didn't want his mother to suffer, and his feelings on the matter were quite sincere, if a little harsh. Cheryl still couldn't understand how Cardicel could be so honest and yet so sweet. He was so simple in his feelings that it struck her even more than his words. Cheryl noticed that her son seemed to be confused by her behavior, and she was trying to adjust to the situation. She hoped that with time, things would improve, and that this wouldn't happen again. Cardicel asked in surprise if she was really trying so hard to make things right. She confirmed his words, explaining that all this was happening because he was her husband and his father. Cheryl added that she also doesn't want to be around someone so scary, but she does all this for the sake of her son's happiness and well-being, so that he feels good and comfortable. The boy, unable to contain his emotions, asked if he was truly more important than everyone else. He wanted to understand to what extent his mother was willing to make him a priority in her life, and whether he would always come first. Cheryl firmly replied that nothing was more important than her son. However, Cardicel disagreed, shouting that she would now spend time with her father and forget about him. He felt neglected and, in his thoughts, suggested that they dine together now too without her participation. He was hurt by the fact that his mother no longer devoted so much time to him. After these words, he couldn't bear it any longer and began to run away, trying to escape everything that was troubling him. Cheryl, not understanding what was happening, watched his actions in confusion. Cheryl realized that Cardicel felt forgotten and abandoned. He felt like she no longer paid attention to him, which was the cause of his sadness and anger. Cheryl hurried up to her son from behind and hugged him, trying to reassure him and let him know that no one was more important to her than Cardicel. She would always be there, no matter what. Cardicel asked again if she truly thought so, and Cheryl confirmed that nothing was more important to her than time spent with him. She was willing to give everything to be by his side. The boy, hearing her words, became deeply embarrassed and looked down. He found it difficult to believe her sincerity, and he cautiously said that he hadn't expected such words from her, although he felt grateful. Cheryl didn't quite understand his reaction, and noticed that his voice sounded without much emotion. She assumed his indifference was due to recent events and his still unsettled feelings. She began to realize that, despite everything, he still felt a certain distance from her and didn't trust her completely. This was becoming increasingly obvious, and it was a little upsetting to her. Suddenly, to Cheryl's surprise, Cardicel turned to her and hugged her, which left her quite shocked. She hadn't expected such a gesture, and was a little taken aback by this sudden display of emotion. Cheryl felt uneasy, unsure of what exactly was happening, and asked the boy what he was doing. She was confused, but she still couldn't hide the slight joy she felt at the touch. She noticed how he looked at her sweetly and quietly called her Mom, which touched her. This was an important moment for her, because despite everything, she felt that her son was still with her. Cardicel, slightly embarrassed, said he was simply trying to express his feelings, but added that she needed to rest and recuperate. He offered her a chocolate bear to make her feel better. The boy explained that when she's sick, it's essential to rest and sleep well to recover. He also insisted that with the chocolate bear, her recovery would be much easier and faster. Sheriel felt a surge of gratitude and joy as she hugged her son tighter. Her heart filled with warmth from his care and attention, and she readily accepted his advice. She promised that she would, of course, do everything as he said, and soon felt much better. A few days later, her health did improve, and she was able to care for her son again. She was soon going to see Karditzel and, after checking with the maid, asked if he was sure he would like the surprise. The maid assured her that the information was reliable, as it had come directly from the chef and everything would be fine. The maid was sure Karditzel would be incredibly happy to learn that his mother had personally prepared something special for him. She sensed it could be a special moment for both of them. The lady, in turn, was worried whether he would like what she had prepared. She hoped he would appreciate her efforts and be pleased that she had taken the trouble to make something pleasant for him. Sheriel left for her son, bidding farewell to the maid and heading to Karditzel's room. She felt a sense of urgency, wanting this gesture to be meaningful to their relationship. When Karditzel saw his mother, he was a little surprised by her appearance. He asked if she was feeling better, as he noticed she was still a little weak from her recent illness. Sheriel smiled and replied that, thanks to his advice, she felt much better. His care had truly had a positive impact on her, and she was grateful for it. She thanked her son for not forgetting her condition and for taking the time to care for her. Karditzel remarked that he was always there, as he had promised, and it made him happy to be able to help his mother. He kept his promise to his mother, and Sheriel was very happy and proud of him. It was a special moment for her, because her son showed concern, and she felt his love and attention. Sheriel asked Margot if she could help her with this small matter. The maid readily agreed, knowing how important it was for her mistress that this moment pass as smoothly and harmoniously as possible. Sheriel said she'd brought something delicious especially for her son so they could eat together. She offered him a taste and hoped he'd enjoy it. Karditzel was a little surprised when he saw walnuts in front of him. He wasn't expecting such a treat, but despite his caution, he was intrigued by what his mother had prepared for him. Looking at the nuts, he thought nobles usually ate such things with forks, but he found it much more convenient to try them with his hands. He couldn't hide his curiosity and desire to try everything offered to him. His mother tried very hard, wanting her son to be happy and feel cared for. The maid remarked that the young master might well try, since his mistress had really put in a lot of effort since early morning. Karditzel, of course, agreed to try the cake, but decided to take it with his hands. He was a little embarrassed, but he wanted to try it at this point to show what he was willing to do for his mother. The boy looked delightful as he listened attentively to his mother describe her creation. He was intrigued by the process and eager to understand what she had so excitedly prepared for him. When he tasted the cake, his expression changed slightly. He paused, and his reaction was somewhat odd, causing the mistress and maid to become slightly wary and await his assessment. Sheriel and Margot eagerly awaited Karditzel's reaction. They exchanged glances and, hesitating to break the silence, asked him how he liked the cake, hoping for at least some positive response. The boy, with obvious disdain, said the cake was simply disgusting. His words were frank, and this greatly upset the lady, who had been trying to make him happy with her baking. The lady was on the verge of tears, her efforts in vain. She sadly replied that she understood perfectly and now felt like a failure. She hadn't expected her cake to provoke such a reaction. She wondered if she should have added more sugar, or if the dough hadn't turned out quite as she'd hoped. She immediately sensed she'd made a mistake somewhere in the cooking process. Sheriel apologized, saying the first time is always hard, and promised to do much better next time. She was prepared to put in more effort next time. Karditzel asked in surprise if she had actually made the cake herself. He clearly couldn't believe his mother had decided to bake something with her own hands, as he had never seen her do such a thing before. Sheriel remarked that she'd heard Castle say he liked this kind of cake before, and decided to try making it herself. She admitted she might have gotten it wrong, but she couldn't be sure. But suddenly, she noticed that Karditzel continued eating the cake, despite his initial words. This was unexpected, and she was even a little surprised by his decision, as she hadn't expected him to continue eating. Karditzel continued to eat the cake, despite everything. The lady tried to convince him that everything was fine and that he shouldn't force himself to eat it if he didn't like it, but he remained adamant, continuing to eat it. The boy noted that he was not forcing himself and expressed his point of view. He really liked it, and he did not understand why his mother was so worried about his first impression. He continued eating because he enjoyed it and even asked the maid for another piece, This was his way of showing that he didn't really dislike the cake as much as he'd said before. Shiriel was sure the cake tasted terrible, but Carticel pointed out that he just needed to taste it. He continued to assure her it wasn't as bad as she imagined. The lady was overjoyed to see her son continue eating the cake. She smiled genuinely at him, sensing that he truly appreciated her efforts, and it made her day a little brighter. Shiriel noticed that her son, despite everything, was behaving very sweetly. His kindness and sincerity at that moment couldn't help but touch her. She felt she had to keep trying to be better for him. Carticel spoke sweetly to her and ate cakes with relish, savoring the moment. Seeing her son like this, Shiriel realized that for his sake, she had to strive to get closer to her husband, despite the difficulties. The lady approached the door and knocked. When her husband opened it, she immediately informed the Duke that it was she, making it clear she had come on important business. Her voice sounded confident, despite her nervousness. She reminded herself to smile the moment he opened the door, to be attentive, to take care of herself, and to act normal. Everything had to be different, because her goal was to achieve something important. As soon as the door opened, Duke Lopman's right-hand man, Keithwell Moore, appeared before them. He looked as reserved as ever, but there was a slight wariness in his eyes, unsure what to expect from his mistress's visit. Moore thought he'd been wondering for a long time who might knock, and when he saw the lady, he felt a sense of relief. His face brightened slightly, and he didn't hide his joyful relief at seeing her. He informed the Duke that his mistress had arrived, and the gentleman immediately sensed that something important had happened. His face grew serious, and he began to suspect that something significant lay behind this visit. Shiriel explained that the servants had some problems and needed to consult with the Duke. She tried to remain calm, but her voice was tinged with concern, as if the matter were truly urgent. She asked the Duke for at least a minute of his time, knowing her request might seem insignificant. But the Duke said he was busy and couldn't spare the time, which only added to the tension. The mistress and his right-hand man stood motionless in the hallway, unsure of what to do next. Shiriel couldn't figure out what to do, and Keithwell Moore seemed to be simply waiting for instructions, sensing the tension of the situation. The Duke, noticing that his mistress was still standing at the door, asked if he could hear her and added that he was indeed busy at the moment. He asked her to leave his office, which seemed rather abrupt. His assistant, with his usual polite manner, smiled and said he had an idea. He tried to lighten the mood, but his voice lacked the confidence of his host. However, the Duke, continuing to stare at his papers, declared that he had absolutely no business and would remain busy despite his mistress's requests. He was clearly in no mood for conversation. At that moment, both the lady and her assistant turned to the Duke simultaneously. His behavior surprised them. It seemed they both expected a different reaction, but he remained absorbed in his own affairs. Shiriel was shocked that he could so easily ignore her, his wife. The Duke had seemed so excited before her arrival that he had even prepared a seat for her, but now he clearly didn't want to see her. The lady suggested the Duke rest a bit and thought he should take a stroll in the garden to clear his head. She tried to soften his demeanor, but his coldness remained. The Duke, without looking up, repeated what he had already said. He was busy and couldn't afford to be distracted. He was determined and had no intention of giving in to his position. He continued working, brushing off her suggestions and insistently asking her to leave the office. His demeanor was distinctly hostile, and the lady realized she wouldn't get anything out of him. The servant, noticing the tension, approached his mistress and apologized for the Duke's behavior. He understood that her concern was caused by his cold reception, but it seemed the Duke was too busy today. Despite all this, Keithwell said he was glad to see her and noted that at least this moment was positive. However, his words sounded more formal than sincere. Keithwell also noted that it was getting late and advised her to return tomorrow morning to speak with the Duke. He tried to find some excuse for his behavior. Shiriel thanked him for the advice, but her mood was far from cheerful. While she was trying to compose herself, a maid approached her, clearly noticing her dejection. The maid became concerned when she noticed her mistress seemed depressed and asked if everything was all right. Her words were full of concern. She immediately realized something was wrong. The lady, despite her inner turmoil, still tried to smile at the maid. In truth, she felt that nothing was right, but in a strange way, perhaps it was for the best. She glanced around the office, taking in its calm walls and furniture, and paused again. Thoughts swirled in her head, but none of them could provide her with a clear solution to the situation. The lady realized there was really nothing complicated about it. She simply needed to come up with a suitable reason to visit the Duke's office again. She couldn't think of any other way. The next day, with all her chores completed, the lady was free of all obligations. Her day was completely free, and she decided to dedicate it to her son, Cardicel. She wondered what story she should read to Cardicel today. It was a small treat that always brought her joy, and she wanted to make his day special. The mistress turned to Margot, the maid, and noticed something was wrong. Her voice was tinged with concern, and she couldn't figure out what exactly was bothering her at that moment. Margot announced that she had just received a letter from the Marchioness of Penzel. The lady was surprised to hear this, as she hadn't expected the Marchioness to address her in such a manner. When the lady picked up the letter, she was truly surprised. She began to read the Marquise's words, and questions immediately arose in her mind. What does this all mean, and why now? In the letter, the Marquise expressed gratitude for the lady's attendance at the reception in honor of her son's birthday, and offered to repay her if she wished anything. This was unexpected and strange. The Marchioness offered to select some flowers and cakes for her sons if the lady so desired. It was an odd request, considering they barely knew each other. The lady was quite surprised, as she always declined such offers. This letter seemed somehow strange. Perhaps she had misunderstood its meaning or had made some mistake. She wondered if perhaps this birthday was somehow special. However, the maid reminded her that her own birthday was still a long way off, and the lady wondered about the reason for the letter. The lady concluded that perhaps she simply needed to prepare in advance. This letter could have been part of some plan, and perhaps she hadn't guessed its true meaning. The mistress had changed recently, and the maid Margot couldn't hide her admiration. She saw how much her mistress had changed and how she had become more decisive and confident. The mistress felt she could completely trust her maid. Together, they could prepare such a magnificent and extraordinary ball that she herself would be unable to believe its success. However, she realized that this could be perceived differently. It could appear as if she cared more about other children's birthdays than her own son. This made her feel insecure. It seemed the ball was to take place in 2 weeks. And the Marchioness Penzel, oddly enough, was familiar to her mistress. She couldn't recall where, but the name somehow resonated in her memory. The lady tried to remember where she might have heard of Marquis Penzel. After much thought, she finally realized she was acquainted with Radius Penzel. The name was connected to her past. As the name popped into her head, the lady felt a wave of fear. She recalled details that suddenly filled her with unease, causing her a sense of unease she hadn't anticipated. The whole point was that in the novel Torn Wings, Radius Penzel was the main character's assistant, and Cardicel killed him. The lady hoped that her son would no longer harm others. She sincerely hoped that now, after everything, her son would put it behind him and never harm anyone again. But her inner turmoil persisted, and she couldn't shake these thoughts. She couldn't help but think that all of this was pointless and hopeless. She was losing confidence in her own abilities and didn't understand how to proceed, what steps she should take to protect her son. Margot, the maid, couldn't understand what was happening to her mistress. She watched her condition and didn't know how to help until her mistress herself decided she wouldn't allow her son to repeat the same mistake. The mistress firmly resolved that she would raise Cardicel properly. A resolve arose in her heart, and, gathering her thoughts, she stood up and asked the maid to help her meet her son. The lady said she needed to see Cardicel. She hoped Margot, the maid, would help her arrange a meeting so she could talk to her son and find out what was going on. The gentleman's wife was due to arrive soon, and the assistant informed him of this. He was somewhat surprised that the gentleman was still seeing his mistress, despite her condition and the events unfolding. The assistant couldn't believe that the master met with the mistress so often. This was unusual because previously they tried to avoid each other, and now it seemed strange and abnormal to him. The gentleman thought he simply had nothing better to do, and so he often talked about it, but the guy helping him said he had plenty of work and was already fully occupied with it. Then the Duke paused. After the accident, she had changed, become different. She no longer avoided him and was beginning to show interest, which was strange and intriguing in its own way. She had often yelled at him before, demanding that he take his hands off her and not touch her anymore. Every word she spoke sounded like an order, and he felt her words tearing at him from the inside. He felt distant from her as she stopped even looking in his direction. This hurt him deeply, but he still couldn't let her go, despite her detachment. The lady replied that she shouldn't do that at all. She couldn't understand why he continued to approach her when she was clearly asking for her space and was burdened by his presence. The gentleman tried to convey to her that he would very much like her to smile at him at least once, at least in the morning. His desire was simple, to see her kind face, which seemed to have disappeared. But she calmly replied that she had nothing to say to him and that he should leave. Her words were cold and cutting, and it made him feel like they were drifting apart again. She had always been cold to him, and he thought he'd never see her smile again. He'd already resigned himself to it, but despite everything, deep down he hoped that the situation would change. At one point, she told him she'd brought him some tea to help with fatigue. She offered to share a bite, a rare gesture he hadn't expected. She also mentioned that she'd heard he was patrolling the local area today and would like to join him. It was unexpected, but there was a certain concern in her voice that hadn't been there before. She offered him a break and a chat, offering, as she put it, a delicious pie from a local bakery. This offer was not only a simple treat, but also an attempt to ease the tension between them. Cheryl felt like she, too, might smile when he returned. Perhaps it was her attempt to somehow establish contact, and her words carried a hint of hope that the situation would improve. At least, that's what he hoped. Even if the likelihood was slim, he still waited and hoped that maybe this day would bring at least a few warm moments between them. Suddenly, his assistant turned to him and remarked that the Duke was working too hard. He watched with concern how overloaded his master was, and believed he needed some rest. But the gentleman replied that it was no big deal, adding that work had always been a part of his life. He also tore a page out of his notebook, continuing to jot down his thoughts. The assistant wasn't sure what to do, but he noticed that the Duke's wife was late. This caused him further concern, and he suggested the Duke go and check on the situation. But the Duke, irritated, said that all this was greatly troubling him. He disliked such delays and lack of information, so his mood became even more tense than before. He added that he could easily wither away from boredom and fatigue in this office, so he decided it would be better to take a walk. The Duke didn't want to remain in a closed space and feel under pressure any longer. The servant couldn't figure out where the Duke was headed, as there were still many documents left to be processed in the office. He expected the work to continue, but the Duke decided to leave. The gentleman calmly said that he had to help with these documents. However, in reality, he no longer wanted to delve into the work, and the thought of the paperwork weighed on him. The assistant agreed with the Duke, because he really had to help, but nevertheless, he could not get rid of the feeling that he did not want to continue dealing with these matters. The Duke understood that if he were to go after his wife, she would most likely be in the garden. He, however, did not discuss this, believing that his plans did not depend on where exactly he found her. He asked his assistant not to talk nonsense. If they did meet, it would be by chance. He wasn't planning on long conversations. He was simply leaving, determined not to sit in his office all day anymore. The Duke quickly left, no longer wanting to make excuses for spending all this time in his office. He decided he could now devote his attention to more important matters and not be stuck in one place. As he walked down the corridor, the Duke suddenly heard a child's voice. He thought it was probably his son, who was nearby as always. It was unexpected, but familiar to him. The lady, worried, asked Carticel why he thought she was lying to him. Her questions were tinged with concern, as she couldn't understand why the boy had begun to doubt her words. The boy shouted that she always came to his father first and insisted that she always said he was the most important thing to her. He was upset that his mother now looked like she didn't love him. The boy believed it was crucial for her to be close to his father. This statement was a complete misunderstanding, as he couldn't yet understand the complex relationship between his parents. The Duke, overhearing this conversation, was very surprised. He hadn't expected such a conversation about him and Cheriel, one that was truly full of innuendo, to take place right under his nose. The lady was also confused by this conversation, unsure how to explain to Carticel how she truly felt. This created additional difficulties in their relationship, which did not please her. The Duke was confused. He stood there, eavesdropping on the conversation, unable to understand how he had managed to find himself in such a strange situation, where everything seemed so unpredictable and complicated. He thought about his wife. His heart had long been tied to this feeling. He couldn't understand why it was so difficult to understand her when she wouldn't reveal her true feelings to him. The Duke finally heard Cheriel say that she liked Carticel much more than he did. It was hard to take, especially considering she shouldn't have said such things. Hearing such words was unpleasant for the Duke. He felt not only disappointment, but also irritation. This added even more tension to a relationship that was already difficult. But every time she told the boy this, he declared she was lying to him. Carticel couldn't understand her words and constantly tried to find the truth in her answers, but she couldn't explain it to him. However, the lady confidently declared that she was not lying, and that was precisely why she had come to him to ask if he would like to play with the Marquis of Penzel's son. The offer sounded important to her. The boy asked again, looking at his mother in surprise. She confirmed that she had indeed been invited there, to the meeting. This was unexpected information for him. But he still decided he needed to listen to his mother. The Marquis sent his mistress an invitation to a party in honor of his birthday. She suggested the boy go with her, believing it would be a good opportunity for him. The boy was surprised at first, but remained silent. He didn't know how to react to such a proposal. It wasn't what he expected, and he couldn't decide right away. Then, with a look of confusion, he looked at Mom and said that they would probably need to bring a gift. He wasn't sure, but he felt it was part of the obligation they were under. Sheriel smiled and said it would be better if she brought a gift. She thought it was an important detail that would add fun and joy to the event, and she wanted everything to go well. However, she suddenly saw Carticel burst into tears. He began shouting that she hadn't given him anything, and this shocked her. Her heart sank at the boy's pain. Then, Sheriel realized she shouldn't have said those words about the gift. Those words might have only made things worse, as she could see how deeply it hurt her son. But it was too late. Sheriel never celebrated her son's birthday. It was a painful day for her, and she couldn't bring herself to celebrate it. Every year she passed it by, oblivious to its significance. The boy asked her if she thought things would finally get better after so many years. His voice was desperate, and he screamed that it seemed like she was trying to hurt him again, like before. In the past, she'd ordered him to call her Mom because his voice distracted her. She couldn't stand his requests, his crying, and this caused an even greater distance between them. These were Sheriel's memories that haunted her. She had treated her child so cruelly that she couldn't understand how she could have done it. Such memories pained her. Sheriel moved closer to the boy and quietly told him that his mother had truly changed. She tried to find the words to explain it, but she could see that her son didn't believe her and wasn't ready to forgive. However, the boy decided he didn't need his mother. He didn't want anyone else in his life believing everyone had abandoned him and no longer understood him. His heart was filled with bitterness and loneliness. He continued to cry and say he no longer believed her. It was a bitter, painful confession. The boy couldn't believe his mother had changed and now truly wanted to be with him. She said his voice irritated her, which only made him even more upset. The boy continued to cry, his heart breaking with pain. And he kept repeating that today was his birthday, but no one noticed. Sheriel didn't see anything unusual in this. She thought the boy was simply demanding too much attention, not realizing that his words were an expression of deep pain and loneliness. The boy, with tears in his eyes, asked if she was going to congratulate him. He desperately longed for at least a little care and recognition on this day, but it seemed his mother didn't see his needs. He wanted her to congratulate him truly, to show him attention and love. He dreamed that his congratulations would be sincere, and not just a formality. But Sheriel replied that he should stop acting like a child. She couldn't understand why he still clung to such childish desires, but her words sounded cold and distant. The boy continued to cry, even harder, because he wanted his mother to pay attention to him. He longed to feel her love, but she remained closed and inaccessible to him. He cried just like he had back then, in those days when he was little. At that moment, he again felt like a helpless, lonely child who couldn't find his place in the world. These fragments of Sheriel's memories were terrible. They tormented her like a heavy burden that wouldn't let go. She felt the memories of these moments continue to torment her. The protagonist felt such pain that if she could have comforted her son in those moments, she would have. She would have certainly tried to regain his trust and love, but she wasn't ready then. If she could have congratulated him then, as he wanted, she would have done so. But now that it was all over, she decided to ask his forgiveness, hoping to ease his pain at least a little. She couldn't forgive herself for treating this little boy the way she did. She couldn't understand how she could have remained cold and distant for so long, not seeing how much he suffered from her indifference. The boy screamed that he hated her. His words were filled with pain, and he couldn't hide the feeling. He desperately wanted her to understand how much he was suffering. He continued to cry, repeating that he truly hated her. Every word he uttered sounded like an accusation, as if he were trying to get it out but couldn't find any comfort. Mom continued to apologize, blaming herself for leaving him alone. She tried to find words of comfort, but her own guilt prevented her from calming him. She said she couldn't help, that she didn't know how to show love, and promised it wouldn't happen again. But her words rang hollow, and the boy couldn't believe them. She took him in her arms and told him she would give him love like no one else could. But words couldn't heal the pain he felt in his heart. The boy kept repeating that he hated her, refusing to accept her words. But his mother insisted that she loved him very much and that she would do anything for him. She suggested throwing a grand banquet in honor of his birthday. It was a gesture to regain his favor, but the boy wasn't sure that was what he wanted. But the boy noticed he didn't like having too many people around. He didn't want the party to be too loud. Then she offered to join him. She noted that he liked sweets and that if there were a lot of people, the banquet would be enormous, but this didn't console him. He longed for simple privacy, without unnecessary fuss. The boy said she could decide as she pleased. He was willing to let her make her own decisions without trying to influence them. He didn't care, as long as someone heard him. His mother reminded him that this was a special day for him. She wanted to make it a celebration, but she felt she might not be able to meet all his expectations. She wanted to give him something nice, asking him what he would like. The boy paused, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. But he couldn't answer right away, his thoughts confused. He said he simply wanted congratulations, but she didn't hear him right away and asked him to repeat it. It wasn't a request, but a quiet, almost weightless wish. He said again that he simply wanted to be congratulated. These simple words meant the most to him, even though he didn't know if they could change anything in their relationship. The lady recalled her son's past, and a heaviness arose in her heart. These memories tormented her so much that even now she felt tears welling up. She promised to do her best, but warned that it would take time. She didn't know if she'd be able to keep her promises, but she hoped everything would work out. The boy bowed his head and said he wanted to be congratulated before anyone else. His words were full of hope, even though he knew it might not happen. She was a little upset, unsure of what to say. She simply looked at him, knowing that despite her efforts, he still needed more time and love. She hoped he'd make some time for her tomorrow. She dreamed they could at least spend a little of his day together, despite all the unspoken things they hadn't said. She suggested throwing a party in his favorite garden, asking his opinion. It was her way of making the day meaningful to him, even if he didn't ask for much. She hugged him, and the boy said he agreed. Despite his hurt, he still agreed to her proposal, perhaps because he wanted to feel at least a drop of her love. The Duke stood by the door the entire time, watching everything that was happening. He remembered that the next day he had to go to the garden, where an important party was planned. Tomorrow promised to be quite a long day, so he needed to prepare in advance. Plans were already forming in his head, and he knew he needed to be prepared for what might happen. The next day, everyone around congratulated the little gentleman on his birthday. Surrounded by attention, Karditzel received congratulations from everyone present. The Duke noticed that it was especially noisy that day. Everything around was filled with the sounds of celebration, and the atmosphere clearly indicated that they were gathering for an important occasion. He'd been working hard with his assistant the previous night, which had taken some of his energy. But now, the busy day was making him feel a tension that seemed unrelated to his work. He thought everyone here seemed a little crazy. The festive atmosphere was so vibrant and energetic that it was impossible not to notice how everyone was changing under its influence. As he approached, he came across a whole row of maids and servants, all dressed in festive and formal attire. All of this lent a sense of importance to the event. Karditzel's mother, Madam, said the suit suited her son very well. She looked at it with pride, hoping that this day would be special and memorable for him. She smiled and wished her son a happy birthday. Her words were full of tenderness, and she hoped that this day would be joyful and full of love for Karditzel. Karditzel was a little embarrassed, as he was being congratulated not only by his servants but also by other people he knew. There was a huge cake on the table, which also made him a little uneasy. The lady had a strange feeling, as if someone was watching them. This feeling of unease wouldn't leave her, and she couldn't understand what exactly was making her so worried. Looking around, she noticed that the Duke was also at the celebration. His presence surprised her, as she hadn't expected him to be among the guests. She thought she might step away for a moment. She needed to sort out this uneasy feeling and talk to the Duke to understand what was going on. Approaching the Duke, she asked why he had come. There was some surprise in her voice, as she hadn't expected him to be interested in what was happening. The gentleman smiled and asked what was going on, noticing that she was wearing a rather funny-looking hat. He was clearly in the mood for a joke. She replied that the hat wasn't funny, but rather that it was actually quite difficult to make. Her words were serious, though she sensed the conversation would be lighthearted. However, the most important thing right now was that they were having a birthday party for their son. She hoped everyone would be happy, and that the day wouldn't turn into some kind of chaos. Karditzel didn't like it when there were too many people, so she decided to hold the party here, so that he would feel comfortable and not worry about the crowd. The Duke didn't quite understand why she continued to do something she'd never done before. He couldn't understand how she could have changed so much by deciding to spend the holiday. The Duke was usually stern and disliked such events, but today he was generous with his questions. His interest in the proceedings was strange and even a little irritating. She noticed that her son was very sweet. She was genuinely proud of him because despite his personality, he was charming in his own way, and she tried not to forget that. The Duke remarked that she had left her son with the nanny because she found it repulsive even to touch him. It was a strange and painful reproach, one that weighed heavily on her. The lady said it was strange, but despite everything, her son was so sweet and energetic, although sometimes she still remembered the emotions she had experienced before. The Duke said she had changed, that she now behaved like a different person. It was noticeable, and he even began to think she was only pretending to be herself. The lady replied that it was all related to her changes. She suggested that they raise their son together, hoping this would help them restore their connection and harmony. The gentleman was greatly surprised and noticed that the lady called her son by his given name but still addressed him as Duke. This moment left him touched and raised questions. He was surprised to note that she couldn't even remember his name since they had never used it in all this time. This clearly made him question their relationship. The lady tried to remember his name by addressing Margot, but she was unsuccessful as she never used it. It was strange to her, but she didn't know what to do. She tried to say his name, but the Duke interrupted her, insisting she say it right then and there. He persisted, not understanding the difficulty. He didn't understand why she couldn't say his name for so long, since it didn't seem like such a big deal to him. He was simply surprised by her hesitation. The lady became alarmed and finally called him Kian. This name, shortened and unexpected, evoked mixed feelings in the Duke, which was unusual for him. The Duke was deeply embarrassed. Hearing his name abbreviated and spoken so tenderly, it embarrassed him even more. He hadn't expected that from her. She noticed that he liked it when she addressed him so softly and asked what he thought about it. She waited to see his reaction. The gentleman simply blushed, his face turning bright red. He couldn't respond and simply remained silent, his reaction clearly caused by the unexpectedness of what was happening. The lady realized she couldn't remember his full name. This made her feel uneasy, and she realized she would have to do something to avoid any embarrassment. It seemed she hadn't been able to cope with the situation. Normally, she would have put up a barrier in the relationship, but now her anxiety only increased. She didn't know how to get out of it. The Duke didn't understand why she suddenly called him by his shortened name. It made him wonder what was going on between them, and why everything had changed so much. He thought that perhaps she really had changed. There was something distinctly new in her behavior, and it made him feel unsure and even a little confused. She asked him again if he really liked it. Her words were sincere, and she was trying to understand how he perceived her changes and new approach. The Duke told her to call him whatever she wanted. He informed her that he wasn't finished with his work and that it was time for him to leave. His response was quick, and he clearly wanted to end the conversation. He left quickly, and the lady felt a slight disappointment. Although she was glad she had finally been able to do something, she was upset that their conversation had been interrupted like that. Meanwhile, Carticel approached his mother and tugged at her skirt. He wanted to know what she had talked about with her father. His interest was obvious, and he couldn't help but notice her unease. The boy asked what she had told his father. He noticed something was wrong and couldn't understand why she was acting so strangely in the Duke's presence. The lady was surprised by his question and replied that it was nothing special, really. But her words couldn't hide the slight confusion she felt at that moment. She thought perhaps he wanted his dad to congratulate him. She couldn't understand how she could have missed this moment and disregarded her son's wishes on such a day. The lady apologized, explaining that Carticel was simply angry because his mother hadn't invited his father to the party. That explained his mood. She noted that his father had actually come to wish him a happy birthday. However, he was too busy to stay long, which greatly upset the boy. He was only able to come for a moment, as he was busy with other matters. He couldn't approach his son personally, which upset Carticel, who had expected more attention. The boy became angry. He didn't want to hear any more talk about his father and expressed his displeasure, because once again it all came down to his father's failure to congratulate him. The lady reminded him that the party was still going on. She tried to immortalize this moment so that Carticel wouldn't lose the joy of the day, despite his displeasure. She asked her son to speak louder because she couldn't hear him. Her words were thoughtful, trying to pay attention to his words so that everything wouldn't go wrong. The boy took her hand and told her they had made a cake. He was proud of it and wanted to share his accomplishment with his mother, hoping it would cheer her up a little. The lady was surprised, unsure what to do when he was so sweet. His simple desire to show her the cake was so touching that she couldn't help but feel it. The boy approached her, offering to try the cake. He was confident it had turned out better than usual. He was ready to share his small achievement with her. This cake was made with ingredients carefully selected by the lady. She chose everything with special care, hoping her son would love the result. The lady said she didn't bake the cake herself, but she hoped Cardicel would be pleased. She carefully selected the ingredients and hoped she had created something special. The boy hoped she would congratulate him. He expected his mother to recognize his efforts, like everyone else's, and to feel that this day was truly important to him. It was so sweet. He felt his efforts were appreciated, and that meant more to him than words. The moment was filled with love and warmth. The lady was surprised and said that of course she wouldn't forget this moment. Her son's birthday was the most important day for her, and she definitely couldn't forget such a special day. The lady remarked that this party was a kind of compensation for all the moments she had missed before. It was like a recompense for lost joys. She was sure the next moment would be even more joyful. It was then that she saw the boy smile for the first time, and that smile touched her heart. The boy asked if she was smiling, but the lady couldn't understand the source of such sadness. This feeling had suddenly overcome her, and she didn't know how to deal with it. Suddenly, she began to cry. Her chest tightened with emotion, and she found it difficult to breathe. She couldn't understand why she was feeling so much pain, because he had said he wanted her to look at him, even if it wasn't sincerely, but still. The boy was frightened and asked why she was crying. He sincerely hoped that she was okay and that her tears didn't mean anything bad or serious. Mother wiped away her tears and said everything was fine. She assured him there was no need to worry, though in truth she wasn't sure of her own feelings. She explained that these tears were tears of happiness. She herself didn't understand how long she would have to lie to her son, because in reality, she just wanted to ask for forgiveness. The boy remarked that they say sweets make you feel better. He offered her some cake with a smile, hoping it would lift her spirits and brighten her day. He said the cake was delicious and offered to let her try it. He was sure it would help her feel better and return to a more joyful state. When the lady tasted the cake, she smiled. It was a simple but sincere expression of gratitude, for the boy's gesture made her feel appreciated. The boy insisted she take another bite. He was sure it would make her feel even better, since the most important thing to him was his mother's well-being. The servants were delighted. They saw how beautifully everything was working out, and now it became clear to them why they had been given this life, to serve and be part of something important. The lady continued her travels, though she still felt a little strange. Perhaps this was due to the memories she couldn't shake, despite her happiness. Perhaps it was the memories that prevented her from truly enjoying the moments of happiness. She shouldn't have felt such heaviness, especially when everything seemed so good. A couple of days later, she was back in her office, working. She tried to concentrate, but thoughts of her son and the events that had just happened still clung to her. She finally finished her chores, and the maid thanked her for her efforts, noting how much she had put into the job. These words helped her feel a little better. The maid asked if the mistress was going to see her master. She expected that the mistress would have gone by now, since it was her promise she wanted to keep. However, the lady said she couldn't go now. The boy asked why she hadn't come, as he didn't associate with people who didn't keep their promises. She explained that she was very sorry, but an urgent matter had come up that she had to resolve quickly. She hoped he would understand and forgive her for this slight digression. The boy said that if everything was okay, there would be no excuses next time. He believed there should always be a place for him, and he was the most important thing. The lady said with a smile that, of course, no one was more important to her than him. She assured him that he would always come first, no matter what she was doing. The lady informed her superior that her master was busy again. It was a new day, and she tried to leave everything as it was, so as not to interfere with his work. She brought him tea and asked where to put it, but the gentleman suddenly told her to sit down. The assistant immediately left, leaving them alone for a brief conversation. Usually the master tells her to leave, so the mistress thought that today would be a special day when she would not have to leave his presence. The Duke noted that he was always busy with work and had virtually no time for rest. Nevertheless, he allowed his mistress to stay as he didn't mind her company. He said that now she could come to him whenever she wanted, and he would not drive her away, as he had before, which of course was a pleasant change. The lady thought that perhaps the Duke had finally decided to speak frankly with her, and she was delighted. She thanked him for such attention. The Duke noticed that she had previously called him by his given name, Kian. This was significant, as she had always addressed him by his title, avoiding his given name. The lady was a little surprised, but still admitted that, yes, she called him by his name again, and it became habitual for her at that moment, as if she always addressed him that way. The gentleman said he would probably be the first one to come to her now. This was an acknowledgement of the importance of their relationship, and he noticed that it had become easier and more relaxed to be around him. The lady understood that she loved both of them, but she couldn't quite figure out how to be with two men at the same time. This caused her internal struggle and confusion. The maid remarked that if that were the case, she had a solution to the situation. She was confident she could find a way to help her mistress cope with her conflicting feelings. The lady was delighted to hear that the maid had found a solution and immediately asked what kind of solution she was talking about because it was important to her. The Duke continued to work, immersed in his papers, undisturbed by conversation. He was completely occupied, but he understood that his mistress and maid were discussing important matters. The lady and her son were in the room with the Duke. It was a moment when they were together, and everything seemed perfect, but inside the lady, there was still a sense of unease. In theory, everything was perfect, but she couldn't figure out what could go wrong. It seemed like everything should be perfect, but something kept bothering her. The maid approached her mistress and said that if she wanted to get closer to the young Duke, she had an idea. It was important, and she could help her mistress in her situation. The maid suggested they all meet together, assuring them they would both enjoy it. It was an idea that could help ease tension and improve their relationship. The lady felt strange in the dining room. She had painful memories there that were now preventing her from perceiving what was happening normally. The maid suggested they simply go and have tea. She had been visiting the Duke frequently lately, and she could invite the young master to join them. The lady agreed because she always felt awkward when she was alone. But with her son, she was sure everything would be fun and the atmosphere would be much more comfortable. The lady felt she could no longer remain silent. Her inner turmoil prevented her from further concealing her feelings and thoughts. She wanted to be frank. She turned to the boy, trying to get his attention. She hoped that at least he would understand her state and help her cope with her emotions. The boy looked at her and realized she needed something. He was attentive to her mood and tried to understand what she wanted to say or how he could help her. The Duke also turned to her and asked if she needed anything. He was ready to help, but he didn't know what exactly the lady expected of him at that moment. The lady replied that she didn't need anything. She didn't want to say anything unnecessary and decided that for now this was the best solution to avoid unnecessary conversations. The Duke said her name again, Kian. The lady began to think he genuinely liked being called that. The attention clearly didn't leave her indifferent. The lady sighed heavily, realizing it was true. But her thoughts were interrupted by her son, who had just approached, and she felt that her attention should now be solely on him. The boy looked at her, waiting for her to say something. He was always sensitive and attentive, so he knew perfectly well that the lady wanted to discuss something with him. However, the lady felt something strange in the air, as if a dark aura were thickening around her. She decided it would be better to focus on the conversation with her son and ignore everything else. The lady reminded him that they would be going to a birthday party in a few days. She was sure the boy remembered this important event and that everything was prepared. The boy said that only he and his mother would go to the party. It was his little dream, and he was happy that they would spend the day alone, without any extra people. These words immediately irritated the Duke, who immediately turned away. His productivity was completely disrupted, and he felt devoid of focus and energy. The lady asked if he could promise her anything before their trip. She was in no hurry, but she knew there were important things that needed to be discussed before the trip itself. The boy asked what exactly she wanted. He put the book aside, ready to listen and fulfill any request, always remaining open to her wishes. Carticel, though young, still understood that he was unlikely to harm Radius now. But he still wanted to see him and talk to avoid misunderstandings. The lady noted that it was the boy's birthday and he would be interested in meeting someone his own age. She wanted him not to feel lonely on this day. The boy asked if the lady really thought this was necessary. He was trying to understand how important it was for her to have him interact with the other children at the party. The lady noted that he had likely forgotten an important lesson she had taught him, that he shouldn't avoid interacting with people, even if he doesn't like them. The boy confidently said he remembered everything his mother taught him. He knew she'd said it was important not to ignore people just because you don't like them. The lady praised him, saying he was a smart boy. She was glad that the boy understood her words and was ready to apply them in life. This meant a lot to her. The woman also added that she wanted the boy to make friends and have fun with them. She dreamed of him being happy and enjoying social interactions. She asked him to promise to try. She knew that if he promised, he would keep it, and this gave her confidence for the future. The boy agreed, promising his mother he would try his best. He always wanted to make her proud and was willing to fulfill her requests, despite his youth. He said he didn't even need to say it because he knew his mother was always right. He trusted her and wanted her to be happy with his actions. The lady was increasingly amazed at how her boy could be so obedient. He always listened attentively to her words, and this was her greatest joy. Suddenly she noticed the papers beginning to scatter, and her gaze involuntarily shifted to the Duke. He was still sitting, oblivious to what was happening in the room. The lady asked the boy to wait on the sofa while she got up and approached the Duke. She felt she had to do something to help him sort out his affairs. The Duke had been overloaded with work lately, and her attention to his problems was important. Perhaps his irritation stemmed from his inability to concentrate due to fatigue. The lady approached the Duke and anxiously asked if everything was all right. She noticed his fatigue and suggested calling a doctor to make sure everything was all right. The Duke replied that there was no need for a doctor, but he took her hand. He asked seriously if their son was really as good as she thought. His gaze was sincere. The lady replied that this was, of course, true. After all, the boy was their son, and this confirmed her words. She was proud of him, and her confidence left no doubt. The Duke glanced at his son and fell silent for a moment. He was pleased, but his gaze suggested that everything concerning family was important and significant to him. The boy smiled and happily declared that he was indeed good. He laughed, his emotions were genuine, and at that moment his joy was noticeable to everyone. The gentleman agreed, adding that the boy was even pleased with the slightest signs of care. He was very sweet, and this childish spontaneity played into his hands. The lady also smiled, looking at the two of them. Her joy was genuine, for they had both been the most important part of her life, especially since her reincarnation. The Duke and his son looked at her curiously. They couldn't understand why she was suddenly smiling like that, and they began asking questions, trying to figure out what was causing her joy. The lady realized that if they continued to puzzle her out, they would soon ridicule her. She decided to keep her smile a secret, thinking it was just a passing mood. She explained that she was smiling simply because she was happy. It was a simple but sincere explanation, and she didn't want to complicate the situation. The lady suggested a short break and some tea. The Duke agreed, understanding that it would help him relax and spend some time in a quiet environment. The boy, however, sat in the corner and looked at his father with displeasure. He wasn't entirely pleased with what was happening and didn't seem to share the adult's mood at the moment. The maid, noticing what was happening, wished the young master and mistress good luck on their journey. She was ready to help, but she understood that they were about to embark on an important journey. Carticel tugged at his mother's skirt and said his ribbon had come undone. It was unexpected, and he felt a little awkward himself, but he still needed help. The lady was surprised, but thought he simply didn't know how to tie ribbons yet. She knew the time would come when he would learn, but right now her help was needed. The boy said nothing more, and his mother remarked that it was no big deal. She offered to help him, as it was important to her that he felt confident. The lady helped him with the ribbon, and just then the Duke approached them. He asked if they were ready to leave. His voice was calm, but there was a sense of urgency in it. The lady was startled when she suddenly saw him behind her. She hadn't expected him to appear and immediately felt a certain tension from his approach so quickly. She thought that perhaps he wanted to discuss something important before they left, but she hoped that he was not going to go with them, and that she had misunderstood something. The lady assumed Kian simply wanted to wish them good luck before their departure. That would have been perfectly logical, and she didn't think his intentions could be anything else. The Duke didn't understand what had happened at all. His face was calm, but inside he felt something unsettling. He didn't know how to properly handle this moment. The Duke said he simply needed to stop by headquarters, so he left shortly afterward. His business required immediate attention, and he couldn't afford to linger. The lady became thoughtful as she watched him leave. She was a little worried about how things would turn out, and wondered when the Duke would ever find time for himself. The Duke's assistant also told the lady to wait a bit. He was polite, but his words were filled with a hint of impatience, as time was ticking and everyone had to move on. He noticed it was a coincidence, as everyone seemed to be heading in the same direction. It seemed odd, but it was obvious to him that their paths were crossing. The Duke offered to ride in the same carriage, but Carticel immediately refused. He declared that he would never ride in the same carriage with him, and his decision was unwavering. The Duke, without objection, said it was no problem for him. He was prepared to travel in a separate carriage if it was important to the boy, but he himself didn't consider it a big deal. The lady noticed that they would be uncomfortable in such a small carriage, and this worried her. She thought it would be better if they traveled differently, but she didn't argue. The boy essentially said the same thing. He emphasized that it was indeed inconvenient, and suggested choosing a different carriage to make the ride more comfortable for everyone. The Duke, however, said there was no need. He was confident they had enough space and saw no point in changing their plan. His decision was firm, and he didn't argue. The lady noticed that they were all acting strange today. She couldn't understand why everything was going so unusually. This caused her some concern. But soon she decided not to ask questions or pursue details. Everything was clear, and she understood what was happening without needing further explanation. The lady decided that Kian wanted to get to know Carticel better, so he insisted on traveling together, trying to establish a rapport, which was natural for them. Her husband, however, was simply shy. She knew he was trying hard and decided she needed to support him to make the trip smooth and comfortable for everyone. The lady agreed to travel separately and asked that a separate carriage be prepared for them so that they could set off together. Her words were confident. Her husband and son weren't expecting such a decision. They were both surprised by her determination, but that didn't stop them from agreeing with her plan, as she always knew what to do. The boy immediately jumped into the carriage and declared that he would be quite comfortable on his own. He was confident in his choice and didn't demand any further changes. The lady was surprised that the Duke suddenly remembered his business and began to doubt. He had always been a man of action, but at this moment, this seemed unexpected. The lady began to doubt that she had made the wrong decision, but she couldn't leave her son alone, and so she decided to go with him, despite all her doubts. She approached Carticel and told him it would be his first meal out. She wanted him to feel comfortable and at ease in his new surroundings. The woman tried to calm her son, telling him not to be nervous, but the boy replied that he didn't care. He was already used to such situations and didn't worry. The lady thought he had calmed down, but it seems that wasn't the case. She noticed that his emotions weren't as stable as she'd hoped. She mentioned that someone had said the Marquise made delicious desserts. This piqued the boy's interest, and he immediately paid attention to her words. The boy asked again, incredulous. His mood visibly changed when he heard about the delicious treats, which gave him a boost of energy. The lady knew that by mentioning his favorite delicacy, she would hit the mark. The boy perked up, and that was exactly what she wanted, his happiness. She noticed he was enjoying walnut cake again and asked for it to be made. It was his favorite treat. The boy was delighted to hear there would be walnut cake. His face immediately lit up, and he showed obvious satisfaction at the prospect of the treat. He thought that perhaps the mistress thought he was small, and that he could be lured in with food. There was nothing strange about it, but he liked it. The lady noticed that last time she had failed to please him with his favorite cake, and now she hoped that this dessert would be to his taste. The boy said with a smile that the cake was delicious. Although this wasn't entirely true, he still happily ate it. It was sweet and funny for everyone present. He lied, but he still ate the whole cake, and his behavior was involuntarily endearing. His simple naivety only emphasized his appeal. The boy noticed the lady smile and asked what made her so happy. He was genuinely surprised by her reaction and couldn't understand what had caused her laughter. The lady smiled again and apologized, realizing his simplicity made everything even more endearing. She remarked that he was simply too sweet not to smile. The boy said he would have behaved well even without it. He was confident and didn't need extra praise, although he still appreciated the attention. The lady replied that she very much hoped he would make friends along the way. She was certain the journey would bring him new acquaintances and useful connections. Meanwhile, the maids noticed a very unusual carriage approaching. It was elegant and eye-catching, and everyone realized it was the Duchess who had arrived. The maids greeted their master and mistress with a bow and a show of respect. This was a sign of their due consideration for high society. The boy stepped out of the carriage and offered his hand to his mother, helping her out. He was well-mannered and readily offered his assistance to make her feel comfortable. His mother thanked him, noting that with such a companion she felt like a queen. It was a flattering comparison, which the boy of course appreciated. The butler suggested the lady take a stroll in the garden. It was a good time to relax and discuss important matters, as well as to enjoy nature. The boy noticed a very large cake in the garden. He was a little surprised by its size, but quickly realized that his cake would be even bigger than the one they had seen. However, his cake was even bigger, and that made him happy. He was pleased that he had been right, and this lifted his spirits, giving him confidence. He hid his interest so sweetly that it made him even more charming. His attempts to conceal his emotions only heightened the impression. The Marchioness met the Duchess in the garden, greeting her with respect and joy. She was pleased that she had arrived and decided to converse with her in a more relaxed atmosphere. She noted that she hadn't expected the lady to visit and expressed gratitude for her acceptance of the invitation. It was an important event for her. Sheriel thanked the Marquise for the invitation and said she was delighted to have the opportunity to visit her. The Marquise was also delighted that her mistress had come with her son. The Marquise noted that her son, Radius, had no friends among his peers. She expressed concern that he was missing out on interactions with children his own age. Sheriel was eager for her son to make friends. She noticed that, although Cardazel might look disgruntled, he was actually happy to be there. Sheriel thought she and the boy would get along. The lady also noted that her son would like to meet the Marquise's son to find a friend among the children. She was sure her son was very sweet, having inherited his mother's kindness. Sheriel was proud of him, considering him the best example of parenting. The Marquise smiled happily and asked them not to embarrass her. She was pleased to be greeting them in such surroundings, but tried not to show any undue nervousness. They set up projectors so guests could see Radius's sweetest moments. It was something new, and everyone was eagerly awaiting the presentation. When Sheriel heard about the projector, she didn't even know such devices existed in this world. It was a new experience for her, and she awaited it with interest. She was eagerly awaiting the opportunity to use the camera. She wanted to capture the sweetest moments on her son's face, capturing everything. Sheriel said she wanted to know where she could purchase such a projector. She was interested in the possibility of capturing these moments for years to come. The Marquise replied that there was a light next to the lady that was used for just such things. This allowed Sheriel to better understand what was being discussed. Sheriel was startled and said she wouldn't film when she noticed a light. This light turned out to be special, and she decided she wouldn't interfere with the process. She quickly realized what this meant. She was about to imprint every single face of her son on her memory. It was connected to a new technology, and she was a little taken aback. The Marchioness expressed regret that this was so, but confirmed that Radius was indeed very sweet. The party was intended for children, and they were the main characters of the event. She invited Sheriel to join the event, noting that mothers often sat separately, enjoying the company. It was an offer worth accepting. The boy asked his mother if she would go. He was a little worried because he didn't know what to expect from the evening and wanted his mother to stay close. Sheriel reassured her son, telling him not to worry. She asked him to promise to behave, as their separation would only be for a short time, and she needed to trust him. The butler asked where he should take the master's belongings. He was ready to do his job and continue providing comfort to his masters without asking unnecessary questions. The Marquise assumed Sheriel was worried about her son. She understood that this was the mother's first experience meeting her children at such gatherings, and that she was nervous. Sheriel confirmed this, adding that this was her son's first experience interacting with his peers. He had never been to such events before, and everything was new to him. Sheriel didn't often attend such events. It was new to her, and she wasn't entirely sure how to behave in such company, but she decided to trust the situation. Marquise noted that Sheriel would be attending these meetings more often in the future. It's a great opportunity to talk about the children and their development. The Duchess was delighted to be able to participate. The Marchioness immediately told her where the ladies' table was so she could relax and enjoy the event. She announced that Duchess Loperam had arrived and asked everyone to greet her. The entire hall was soon filled with gracious greetings and respect. The lady noted that she had only heard of Sheriel but had never met her in person. Now she had the opportunity to get to know her better. The Marchioness invited the Duchess to sample the desserts, particularly the cookies their chef had prepared for the evening. She was sure the guests would love them. Sheriel thanked them for the offer and said the cookies were indeed delicious. It wasn't her first time tasting them, but she was still pleased. The Marchioness promised to ask her to make more cookies the next time the Duchess visited. Sheriel thanked her and said she would invite her to her son's birthday. The woman continued to watch the Duchess closely as she conversed with the Marchioness. Her gaze was attentive and curious, but she tried not to be intrusive. She said that since she was here, she'd like to ask a question. It was a request she couldn't resist, and she wanted to learn something important for herself. The lady started the conversation by mentioning that she'd recently gotten a dog. Sheriel wasn't quite sure why she'd mentioned it and didn't know what to make of it. She added that owning dogs isn't cheap. She raised an important question, which Sheriel found a little odd, but which intrigued her nonetheless. The lady inquired about what to do with dogs that disobey their owners. This was a serious matter for her, and she expected wise advice from Sheriel. She asked what the Duchess of Loperam had to say about this matter. She was interested in the experienced lady's opinion on raising pets. Sheriel didn't understand what was being said and asked again. She wasn't sure she'd understood the question correctly and tried to clarify. The lady asked again, thinking that if the dog wasn't listening, perhaps more time should be spent training it. This could help improve the situation. The woman didn't understand the point of keeping a dog if it wasn't obedient. She believed it was pointless, because if a pet doesn't behave properly, what's the point of keeping it? One of the ladies remarked that perhaps the dog should simply be thrown out onto the street, as it was expensive and didn't know its place. It was a good-looking dog. The woman asking about the dog remarked that her pet should certainly be more obedient. She was certain that something needed to be done about it. She thought she now probably understood why her dog had been sold. Apparently, her personality had been the problem, and she herself was partly to blame. Her owner turned out to be a foreigner, and perhaps that's what caused her problems. She thought he simply didn't understand animal training. The woman didn't quite understand what they were talking about, since they were talking about her dog. The lady, however, seemed to realize they were discussing her pet and listened attentively to the conversation. The woman also mentioned that the owner might be a foreigner. She thought this might be an important fact that would help clarify the situation. The woman thanked the lady for her opinion and acknowledged that her dog sometimes behaved silly, but she promised to try to train her pet. Sheriel felt angry, not understanding why this woman would even discuss her pet in such a tone. She considered it unacceptable. They say high society is a battlefield, but Sheriel decided she would intervene. Despite the strangeness of the situation, she couldn't remain indifferent. Sheriel wanted to see her son as soon as possible and hoped he was having a wonderful time. This was the most important thing for her in this situation. The woman turned to the lady, reminding her that she was planning to invite guests to her mansion. This was the moment for Sheriel to show confidence. The woman asked again if the lady was sure this was a good idea. Sheriel didn't understand the situation she was being drawn into, but she was certain she couldn't lose. The lady smiled and confidently said she was absolutely certain of her decision. She also added that she didn't think she should let them interfere with her plans. Sheriel replied that she wasn't afraid of the Duke's actions, as she saw no reason to worry. She believed there was no need to worry about his opinion. The lady noticed that it was now clear to her that the Duke simply didn't care, and she could no longer enjoy the moment. She felt her mood had been ruined. The Marquise intervened, offering to share her thoughts on the topic under discussion. This was the moment when her opinion could play a key role in the conversation. Sheriel was upset, as she felt that the Marquise now also sided with those she disliked. This only exacerbated her inner tension. Sheriel mentioned that she had a beautiful parrot that sometimes said strange things. These phrases always left her puzzled, unsure where he got them from. She added that the parrot was sometimes rude and boorish, and Sheriel couldn't understand where he got such behavior from. This question remained a mystery to her, one that couldn't be solved. Sheriel couldn't understand whether this woman was really standing up for her, or was simply beating everyone in a row without paying attention to the reasons and circumstances. Sheriel expressed her dissatisfaction, saying that she found it unpleasant, and asked how the lady had handled the situation, trying to understand her position. The Marquise replied that she could not change anything because it was just a bird, not a person, and cutting out its tongue was useless. It did not understand what it was saying anyway. She knew this guy had been hanging out with the knight frequently, and now he'd even started showing him off to guests. It was shameful, because such a relationship was openly visible. The Marchioness then advised that in future the lady should avoid displays of rudeness and boorishness, otherwise everyone could find themselves in an awkward situation. The woman Sheriel called a dog was furious at these words, and her anger was obvious to everyone around her. She couldn't contain her emotions. She started shouting that she remembered that she had forgotten to do something important and that she urgently needed to leave, getting confused in her words and irritating those around her. The other guests also began to rise, saying it was time to return home, as it was getting late. They thanked everyone for the invitation and said their goodbyes. The Marquise apologized for any inconvenience, smiled, and wished everyone a safe journey, despite the fact that some of those present were unhappy. The main character thought that the Marquise gave the impression of being a very strong woman, and noticed that she now had an appetite again. Sheriel offered the lady some more cookies, to which the lady replied with a smile that she would be happy to try some more, enjoying the moment. The two of them remained at the table, and the atmosphere between them became pleasant. Conversation became easy, and Sheriel felt comfortable around her. Meanwhile, the children continued playing around the dessert table. The boy was enjoying a pecan pie, savoring the taste of his favorite dish. The Marquise's son, noticing that it was time for a break, suggested taking a break from the game to rest a little and talk with Carditzel. He looked towards the boy and said that he would be back soon, assuring him that he would stop playing for a while to discuss something important. Approaching Carditzel, he smiled and asked him if he liked the dessert, hoping that the boy would appreciate their treats and find them delicious. The boy replied that the dessert was very tasty, but he actually wanted to continue playing with the children, so he stayed nearby despite the delicious treat. It was quite funny, because he himself was still a child, although he was different from the others, playing with them more out of necessity. But his mother said she wanted him to make new friends and have fun. She believed that interacting with children would help him become more open. If he didn't keep this promise and continued to avoid communication, his mother might start to become disillusioned with him, which was an unpleasant thought for the boy. So, he started a conversation with Karditzel, offering him a cake to try, trying to engage him in conversation and get him interested in communication. The boy was surprised when he was asked if he knew who he was and decided that it was an interesting question that was worth answering, despite the strangeness of the situation. Karditzel replied that he did not know the boy and, frankly, saw no need to recognize someone of lower status than himself. The boy said he could give a hint. This cake was made by their pastry chef, and perhaps Karditzel should pay attention to it. Karditzel suddenly realized that the person standing in front of him was Radius Pencil, a guy who had recently impressed him with his manner of speaking and behavior. He realized that this guy was the culprit of everything that was happening, and the boy immediately noticed that this was indeed true. I wonder if he envied him because of this? Radius replied that he wasn't envious at all. This surprised Karditzel, and he couldn't resist asking why he was so sure of his feelings. The boy said that his mother would now congratulate him every year on this occasion. He was glad that everything had turned out this way, and hoped that everything would be fine. Radius, noticing Karditzel's blush, asked him what had happened. But Karditzel didn't answer and instead inquired why he'd even come over, since they were having enough fun without him. Radius said he looked much more interesting than everyone else, and leaving him alone would be impolite. He clearly valued Karditzel's company and was reluctant to let him go. Karditzel realized that Radius clearly wanted to talk, and he noted that his mother often praised him for his behavior and manners, which was quite unusual. Then, after thinking for a moment, Karditzel said that his mother also praised him tirelessly. He knew how proud she was of him and his successes. Radius, curious, asked if he was sure his mother praised him often, since his mother seemed to do so much more often than Karditzel's mother. Karditzel, in response to this remark, said that his mother doesn't even let him rest, always demanding more and more. Radius noted that Karditzel's mother does a lot for him. Karditzel didn't dwell on these thoughts. He wasn't worried, because he knew his mother was the most important person to him and unmatched by anyone. He didn't worry too much about other kids praising him because his mom, unlike others, actually knew how to support him. At that moment, a chubby boy approached them and remarked that he thought that Radius Pencil had abandoned them to discuss something important, and was not just playing with a child. Radius noted with a smile that he probably should have gathered a company for the game and not come to them unnecessarily, since it was his responsibility. The chubby boy began shouting that the Radius knew nothing, saying that the boy was a savage with the blood of a thief. His words were clearly aggressive. He also added that his mother said that if he even went near the boy, he would be cursed for life. This caused confusion among everyone. Karditzel, unable to contain himself, burst out laughing and asked if he could answer for his words, since such accusations could not go unanswered. The boy confidently replied that of course he could, and seemed to think Karditzel would be scared. He even tried to make his face look more serious. One of Father's assistants, noticing the situation, intervened, stating that Karditzel was a member of one of the most noble families of the Empire, and he needed to learn to have manners. He said that when Karditzel grew up, he wouldn't even dare raise his head in the presence of these people. This was due to his status being so high. Karditzel, however, understood that this was just empty talk. He had no intention of taking these threats seriously, and considered such words unworthy of attention. Karditzel also noted that he was well aware of these rumors, and perhaps the guy was simply not smart enough to control his words in the presence of the future Duke. The boy, hearing this, became very frightened and, blushing, asked what Karditzel was really talking about, hoping that he was not taking his threats seriously. Radius asked what Karditzel intended to do. Karditzel calmly replied that he shouldn't have mentioned his father's title, as he had no intention of doing anything. Radius, confused as to why Karditzel had responded so calmly, asked if he considered it shameful. He'd expected the boy to react differently. The boy said he'd promised his mother he'd get along with the kids, so he intended to avoid conflict. Radius, however, said he'd also like to add something. Radius emphasized that his mother told him he shouldn't bully his friends over rumors. It was a very bad thing to do, and he didn't want to do it. At that moment, the same woman with her friends who had previously talked about the dog ran up to them and called Varun, inviting him to leave with them. She shouted loudly that they had to leave there immediately and did not want to stay and watch the situation continue to develop. The boy was a little surprised, but quickly ran to his mother, clearly not wanting to stay in such strange surroundings and feeling that he did not belong there. Karditzel noted that he was told to befriend this boy because they were the same age, but adults often forget that children think and play in their own way. He added that adults should not behave like these people because they do not follow their own rules, and children are always more sincere and honest in their actions. The Marquise noticed that interacting with her son always made her lose track of time. At such moments, time seemed to simply disappear, and she didn't notice the hours passing. Sheriel agreed with her words, adding that she also feels like time flies when she is with her son, and these moments are always important to her. The Marchioness, amazed, remarked that she hadn't even imagined she and her mistress were so similar in this regard. Many say her love for children is excessive, but she doesn't consider it a bad thing. The Marquise agreed, then turned to Sheriel, asking how she usually spent her time with Karditzel, what helped her feel calm and happy. The lady began to answer, but suddenly felt a dizziness that pierced her consciousness, and for a moment she lost the thread of the conversation, trying to collect her thoughts. A memory from her childhood flashed through her mind, when her father always shouted that she should strive more for high society because looks were all she had. Back then, as a child, she couldn't understand why her appearance was what her father put first, but she felt that there was a certain bitterness and powerlessness in it. Suddenly the memory disappeared and Sheriel felt a strong sense of unease, as if it were not real but merely a fantasy that had caused the painful sensations. The Marquise, noticing that the lady was not looking well, approached her, asking with concern if everything was all right, ready to offer her help if needed. The lady replied that everything was fine and assured that her anxiety was only related to thoughts about her son, and that it was not at all connected with her health or other problems. The Marquise, noticing how much Sheriel was worried about Karditzel, suggested that they could go together and check if everything was okay with him if she was so worried. The lady thanked her for the offer and agreed to go. She felt relieved by such attention and understanding that her concern had not gone unnoticed. Soon they went out with the Marquise and the maids, and the lady thought of her son, confident that Karditzel could not offend anyone, and most likely everything would be fine. The lady had confidence in her son. She knew his character and believed that he could not be to blame for the conflict, although she had heard rumors about how he could behave. Despite this, she recalled the novel she had read about similar situations and thought that in her case, Karditzel would most likely also show an aptitude for peaceful solutions. When they arrived, the lady immediately noticed that the maids were somehow uncomfortably disposed, and their behavior seemed strange, as if they were afraid of something or were hiding something. The maids were frightened when they noticed their mistress approaching, and one of them decided to explain what had happened, quickly telling about the misunderstanding between Karditzel and Mr. Cherty. The maid said that a misunderstanding had arisen between Mr. Loper and Mr. Cherty, which had led to Karditzel crying, which had greatly disturbed everyone present. The lady was shocked to hear this. She couldn't believe her son had cried, and the news hit her like a blow, leaving her feeling helpless and confused. Understanding came with a delay. She realized that she had been wrong in perceiving her son as an adult capable of handling situations, but he was still just a child. The lady glanced at the woman standing next to her son and instantly recognized her. It was the same woman who had teased her dog and repeatedly said nasty things about Karditzel. The son, seeing his mother, rushed to her, bursting into tears, and the lady hastened to embrace him, pressing him to herself, to calm and comfort him at that moment. She reassured him, promising that everything would be fine, and that she was there, despite his worries and fears, which did not allow him to feel confident. The lady asked him with concern if everything was all right, and in a soft voice asked why he was crying, unable to understand what could have upset him so much. At that moment, she felt that she needed to find out who exactly was the reason for her son's tears, and she was ready to do anything to punish the one who dared to offend him. The lady turned her gaze to the woman standing next to her and immediately realized that it was she who had insulted Karditzel, starting with ridicule of the dog and then offended him as well. Unable to bear it any longer, Sheriel turned to Mrs. Cherty with a request to explain and tell what had happened between her and her son, since she could not ignore it. The lady lowered her head and sadly reported that her son had only said that he had made a small mistake, not thinking that it could lead to such consequences. She asked again if her son was really crying over something so insignificant. She couldn't understand what could have upset him so much. The woman, feeling agitated, did not know how to put words together to express her feelings, and many thoughts arose in her head. Radius, noticing her confusion, intervened, suggesting that if everyone agreed, he himself could explain what was happening to ease her anxiety a little. The Marquise approached her son and, trying to calm him down, noted that she had already had to tell him that he should not communicate with impolite people. She reminded him that he was a member of a noble family and should control himself, avoiding communication with those who were not worthy of his attention. Radius said that he knew that he was smart and well-mannered, but it was still better to listen to his mother's advice to avoid unnecessary trouble. The Marquise, feeling guilty, asked her mistress's forgiveness for allowing such unpleasant moments to interfere with such an important tea party. She understood perfectly well that she should not have allowed this to happen, but the lady calmly replied that everything was fine and there was no need to apologize. However, her only concern was why her son was crying, and she was eagerly waiting to find out the reason for his tears. She also asked if the woman had properly apologized to her son for her behavior and not neglected him. Sheriel remarked that she would not have been so patient, and the lady probably knew very well that it was not easy for her either to tolerate such unfair treatment. At some point, the woman decided to tell that her son had offended Carticel, insulting him as a descendant of a barbarian, which had greatly offended the Duke's entire family. Sheriel asked again if she really thought that could justify her son's behavior, since they are often subjected to humiliation, even if he is just a child. She emphasized that the boy probably succumbed to gossip and other people's opinions, which led to such behavior, without realizing the seriousness of the situation. Carticel, trying to calm his mother, said that the boy claimed that when communicating with him, people became cursed, but the lady immediately punished him. She said she thought the act was serious enough to affect the child's behavior, but Sheriel noticed that she had hit her son. The woman was a little embarrassed, not knowing how to respond, because she did not expect that her actions would have such consequences. The lady noticed that she had hit her son, and this indicated a lack of conscience, especially since she had to apologize to him. The lady made a remark that now she should ask her son for forgiveness, and she should make sure for herself that he received the punishment he deserved. Sheriel, leaning toward her son, her voice tinged with irritation, asked him to apologize quickly, as he seemed to not understand the importance of his actions. The boy, however, protested, refusing to apologize, and the woman swung at him again, shouting that he had apparently misunderstood her intentions. At this point, Miss Sheriel intervened, calmly and confidently stating that she had to intervene or things could end badly for everyone. The woman stopped, but still shouted at her son not to hold a grudge and to prepare to apologize. Sheriel insisted that he had to apologize right now, otherwise the situation would not be resolved and all the consequences would fall on his shoulders. The boy, with tears in his eyes, admitted that he did not mean to offend anyone and sincerely asked for forgiveness, realizing his mistake. The woman, looking at him, asked for forgiveness for her son's behavior, wondering where he could have heard such strange and unpleasant things. However, Duchess Sheriel, with a cold expression on her face, shouted at her to immediately take her hands away from her son, otherwise the consequences would be very unpleasant. Sheriel added that she would not touch Carticel with the same hands that had just harmed her son, and would not tolerate such behavior again. She promised that all of this would be discussed with her husband, and she would let him know how everything happened, so that he would understand the seriousness of the situation. The woman tried to stop the lady, continuing to apologize and asking her not to take such serious measures and not to inform her husband. The boy continued to cry, and the woman's heart sank with pain, realizing how hard it was for him to go through what was happening. She couldn't understand why this woman was treating him so cruelly, since he was completely innocent of the current situation. She felt that the boy did not deserve such treatment, and firmly told the lady that children are not toys, but living people with feelings and rights. Therefore, Duchess Sheriel, trying to restore justice, said that there can be no forgiveness for such behavior, and this must be understood. She announced that they were getting ready to leave, and, picking up her son, she headed toward the carriage. There was a hint of weariness in her eyes, but despite this, she continued walking. Upon returning home, the first thing she did was go to her husband, feeling the need to discuss what had happened. He needed to hear everything that had happened to her. This insult was far more than a personal offense. She understood that this humiliation affected not only her, but their entire family. It was too much for her. She returned holding her son in her arms. She told him that she apologized for leaving so abruptly. She hadn't meant for it all to happen this way. The boy calmly replied that he didn't see anything wrong with it. He'd played with the children and eaten, and none of this bothered him. He said he'd behaved well, never hurt anyone, and kept all the promises he'd made. This was important to him, and he was proud of it. The boy added that he would be glad if she didn't leave him. He always obeyed her, and it was important to him that her words come true. She, not understanding where he got such thoughts from, asked him what made him think she was going to leave him. She never received an answer from him. The boy remained silent, but he said that this was how things always happened. So this time, nothing had changed for him. He saw no reason to worry. The lady lowered her eyes, realizing his fears were well-founded. Only 2 months had passed since their reconciliation, and she could understand his concerns. However, it remained a mystery to her why Sheriel was so cold to her son. It remained unclear to her, despite all her efforts. Every time her son said words like that, her heart shattered into tiny pieces. She felt her emotions filling her soul with pain. She began to think that he wasn't her real son, but merely a fictional character from a novel she'd once read. This comparison tormented her. She hoped the boy wasn't lonely and apologized again, promising to always be there for him. However, he said he didn't like it when adults lied. He told her she had to keep her promise, and she couldn't understand why he was so worried about it. She felt like lying was unnecessary in this case. The boy lowered his head again and said that he had kept his own promise, which meant perhaps something else awaited him. It sounded like a hint of something inevitable. The lady paused, unsure how to respond. The boy seemed to be waiting for more, but she couldn't offer anything definitive. He decided that her silence meant there would be nothing more. He took her silence as a sign that it was all over, and there was no point in waiting. But she suddenly asked him why he had decided so, assuring him that he had done the right thing and had been very brave. This was unexpected for him. The lady promised to fulfill one of his wishes. This was important to him, and his face lit up with a smile when he realized his request would be fulfilled. The boy, smiling happily, asked several times if this was really true. He couldn't believe his wish could be fulfilled so quickly. She said that if that was his wish, she would read him a bedtime story. It was a simple but important promise, one she was willing to fulfill. The lady was surprised by this request, not expecting him to ask for this. It seemed unexpected to her, and she was a little taken aback by his request. The boy confirmed that this was indeed his wish. He was delighted that his request had been heard, and his face glowed with happiness. This dog often boasted that his mother read him stories every night. The lady didn't understand which child he was talking about, and she found it strange. The boy mentioned that he was talking about the Radius because they had already met and become friends. This marked a significant moment in his life, as his new friend immediately became close to him. The lady asked again if it was true that this boy was really his friend. She couldn't believe that such a new acquaintance could become her son's friend so quickly. The gentleman remarked that it all sounded wonderful. She expressed a desire to see this boy again and get to know him, as it all sounded very interesting. Mother promised to prepare a cozy place for them, where they could play peacefully, without worrying about the outside world, and without being distracted by extraneous noises. However, her son said he wasn't particularly interested in dating this boy, but if there was walnut cake, he might agree to a meeting. The lady assured him that if he insisted, she would definitely make sure that a cake with nuts was made for him, especially at his request. When they arrived, she noticed the sun had almost set. It had been a tough day, and everyone was tired, even though they had been quite active. Summer was approaching, and she suggested that her son go boating when the weather became warmer, to enjoy the fresh air and warm waters. The boy asked again if he could really go on a boat with her. He was a little surprised, but still interested in the idea. She replied that they would go with the whole family, including her father. Everyone would be able to enjoy time on the water together, and it would be fun for everyone. Sheriel asked him if he thought it would be fun. He replied that he didn't think it was that special, but he wouldn't refuse. She assured him that life would always be more fun with family because his father loved him as much as she did. They would have an unforgettable time together. The boy said that if she promised that she would never leave him and would be there, then he wouldn't mind going on the boat with them. The lady thanked him for this decision, and he looked at her with gratitude, realizing that her words were sincere and warm. She said that his mother would try her best for her son and gave him a warm smile that showed all her love and care for him. Once the lady was in her room, she wondered what Lady Churdy had meant at dinner. Her words left a mark on her mind. Perhaps Sheriel was forced into marriage with Kian, as it was unclear why he was suddenly being called a barbarian. It all seemed strange and confusing. She couldn't understand why she'd left the boy alone at such a crucial moment, why she'd done it, and what had really happened in her life. What was even more surprising was that her husband said she hated him. This accusation sounded strange, especially given their family relationship. Everything about etiquette and social norms seemed imposed from the start. As soon as she arrived, everything seemed alien and foreign. But Cheryl had no memory of her family, which added to her anxiety. She felt as if something was wrong, and her past was hidden under a shroud of oblivion. She needed to remember what she had forgotten. So she turned to the maid, hoping for her help in uncovering secrets and restoring what had been lost. The maid immediately asked if her mistress had called her. She came upon hearing her mistress's name, ready to help with any questions that might arise. Cheryl asked if there was prejudice against foreigners in the empire. It was an important question for her, as she felt the burden of it herself. The maid dropped the dishes, so startled by the question that her reaction was instantaneous. She hadn't expected such open interest. The maid wondered why her mistress had suddenly decided to ask such a question. She was curious about what had led her to this question and what she really meant. She apologized to the lady if she had offended her in any way, but the lady reassured her, saying that everything was fine and that Margot shouldn't worry. It's just that something unpleasant happened at the meeting with the Marquise. The Countess's son said that Carticel had savage blood in his blood. He claimed that if his children approached Carticel, they would be cursed by his presence, that he was ill-mannered and not worth paying attention to. The maid thought that the mistress was asking about this precisely because of these words, but she was not sure. The lady replied that, in fact, her memory was still recovering from that accident, and that was why she was interested in it. This explanation immediately became clear to the maid, and she felt relieved. The lady closed her eyes and understood why she liked the young gentleman so much. However, she quickly corrected herself, saying that she had been mistaken in her thoughts. The lady stressed that she should not allow herself to think that everything will return to the state it was before the accident. She admitted that she truly loves her son, and there is no kinder and sweeter child in the world than him. The maid said she understood, but advised her not to tell the Duke about her memory problems. But the mistress didn't understand why the maid thought so. She asked what exactly had happened between them. The maid explained that perhaps there was a reason for this memory loss, since the mistress had changed a lot after the accident. She suggested that if the Duke knew that she had become so kind because of amnesia, it might affect his feelings. If he realizes that his feelings for her are not needed, he may withdraw into himself, not wanting to feel pain. The maid added that when her memories returned, he would not have to worry about seeing her unconscious. The lady asked again, thinking that she had always thought that he hated her. The maid advised the lady to think about it, because if this were so, the Duke would not have spent huge amounts of money on their wedding. The lady was astonished and asked again what exactly this enormous amount of money was. She couldn't believe it. The maid confirmed that the master was indeed ready to propose to her in order to restore the prosperity of her family. The lady realized that all this was true and understood his intentions. The maid promised to contact the Marquise to find out details about the situation with the Duchess, and then convey them to her master. The lady suggested that perhaps it would be better for her to deal with the matter personally. The maid objected that the Duke would immediately notice if she suddenly began to take an interest in foreigners and insist on punishing the Duchess. It will look strange if she starts interfering so actively in these matters. The lady began to think that perhaps she had some personal negative experience with foreigners, and that this was influencing her behavior. The maid reassured her, assuring her that the Duchess would not go unpunished, since she had insulted the only heir. The lady thanked Margot for her help, and asked her to convey information about the fate of the Countess and her family. The maid bowed and wished her mistress a good night's rest. That night, the lady sat in silence, lost in thought, and looked at the floor. She reflected on the fact that she had instructed the maid to find out what would happen to the Countess and her family. The husband, who at first glance avoided her but deep down cared for her, was in her thoughts. Cheryel's family had always treated her with love and care, but she couldn't understand why she acted so rudely and coldly toward them. This left her in a state of contemplation. She would have loved to ask the real Cheryel what had caused this behavior. She was at a loss for answers. She couldn't understand why she was doing this. It was all so strange and incomprehensible to her that it left her with no peace. A week passed, and Cheryel noticed the temperature around her had begun to rise, becoming noticeably hotter. This sensation intensified with each passing day. The maid advised the mistress to drink ice water to help her cope with the heat and avoid overheating. This was important advice in such a hot weather. Margot also brought good news, so she decided to tell the lady what she had learned. The news was quite important and unexpected. Cheryel was surprised and asked the maid what exactly she wanted to tell her. It promised to be something significant, and she was ready to listen. The maid reminded her that her mistress had previously asked for news of what would happen to the devil she had inquired about. This gave Sheriel pause. It soon became clear that she was no longer a countess, and her family would no longer be able to attend important meetings. Everything was changing, and this worried Sheriel. The mistress was shocked. She couldn't believe it was true, and she asked the maid again to make sure she had understood what was happening correctly. During the investigation, it became known that the countess had been having an affair with a knight of her house. This was completely unexpected and had a profound impact on her situation. The maid quietly whispered this to her mistress, and she was completely shocked by what she heard. Everything that was happening seemed incredible and unexpected to her. The lady added that it turned out that Sheriel's son wasn't the count's son at all, and she was thrown out without money or support. Everything was crumbling before her eyes. Sheriel didn't want such a cruel punishment, but apparently it was her karma, and there was no escaping it. She faced the consequences of her actions. The lady, unable to contain herself, asked where her son was. She thought he was in the library, as always. It was a moment of anticipation when she longed to be near him. The maid confirmed that her son was indeed in the library and added that the heat was getting worse. He was unlikely to go outside. Sheriel was eager to see her son and asked Margot to prepare some cold desserts for him. It was a small wish she was eagerly awaiting. Margot approached the lady again and said she had something else important to convey. This piqued Sheriel's interest. Sheriel turned to the maid in surprise and asked what exactly she was going to talk about. Her curiosity was piqued, and she expected to hear something important. The maid said this would be unexpected news that could impact her mistress's future. She hoped that even with the return of her memories, Sheriel would be happy. The maid confidently said that Sheriel would continue to care for her son as before. She was certain that a mother's love would not change. The maid added that, despite the changes, the mistress would remain as golden as she is now. Everything would be as before, despite all the difficulties. She apologized to the lady for any unnecessary worry her words might have caused. It was a sincere apology, addressed to Sheriel. Sheriel calmly replied that she loved her son and would continue to care for him, no matter the difficulties. She wanted him to always be happy. She continued to assure the maid that her son needed to feel loved and important, and that no memories would change her love. Everything would remain as it was. The maid was delighted to hear this. She sincerely thanked her mistress for her confidence and said that she too believed that everything would be fine. The maid admitted that she had not been able to prepare many desserts as planned. But the mistress, despite this, was preparing for the upcoming treats with joy. Sheriel entered the library and, noticing her son was missing, immediately called out to him. She knew he always enjoyed reading there and decided to start looking for him. The library was fairly quiet, and the atmosphere was calming. Sheriel decided it was a good place to take a look around and figure out where Carticel might be. She headed for the stairs, hoping to find him at the top. She soon spotted him. He was sitting at the table, a book in his hands, seemingly asleep, absorbed in his reading. There were plenty of places to rest in the mansion, and although this wasn't his room, it was always cozy. Sheriel approached him and, seeing that he was asleep, gently picked him up. He looked so sweet and vulnerable when he slept, and his flushed face added even more charm. Sheriel looked at him tenderly, feeling the warmth of his body. But a moment later, her calm gave way to anxiety. She sensed something was wrong. Carticel was feverishly hot, and she knew his condition could worsen at any moment. Sheriel began to panic, but then she noticed there was a cooling spell hanging in the library, which was supposed to lower the temperature. She hurried to hold him in her arms, trying to calm herself. At that moment, Carticel groaned faintly, as if unable to remain conscious. His faint sound made Sheriel even more worried about his health. Carticel remembered the words of his friend Radius, who often told him how his mother used to tell him bedtime stories. These memories now brought him some comfort. He'd always known there were plenty of places in the mansion where he could find solitude, but now it seemed his room wasn't the only place where he could feel comfortable. Carticel didn't think this was anything unusual, though he knew other people had similar hidden corners for solitude. He didn't see anything strange in this. Radius, always a little envious, often said his mother loved him much more, but Carticel always knew that in reality, his mother valued him most. Carticel chuckled to himself, remembering how Radius had tried to convince him that his mother loved him more. However, he knew that in his case, his mother's love was unconditional and required no proof. Radius once asked him if he had been cared for when he was sick. Carticel recalled how his mother was always there, holding his hand and comforting him in the most difficult moments. Whenever Carticel felt ill, His mother was always there, never leaving his side. She held his hand, comforted him, and supported him no matter his condition. These moments remained in Karditsel's memory, and he promised himself that one day he would be able to return everything his mother had done for him with the same care and love. Karditzel had never been sick before, and he was always proud of it. He believed it was because he was a good son who didn't make his mother worry. He was sure his health was the result of his good behavior. His mother wasn't worried, and that meant more to him than anything else. He noticed that it seemed his mother loved him even more than he thought. After all, he was never sick, and she shouldn't have to worry about him. This added even more confidence to his thoughts. His mother always called him Cardi because he was a good son. He always did what she was told, and maybe that was one of the reasons she loved him so much. Karditzel felt a sharp pain. His head was splitting and his condition was only getting worse. Cheryl quickly picked him up and began to hurry toward the room. She carried him to his room, where a doctor was immediately called. Cheryl hoped it wasn't anything serious and that his condition would improve soon. The doctor examined Karditzel and reassured them. He said the headache was related to growth and would pass in a couple of days. It was temporary and nothing to worry about. He assured Karditzel that she had no serious health problems and that there was no cause for concern. However, he still advised against ignoring such symptoms in the future. Cheryl couldn't believe it was related to his growth. She'd always assumed that such pains were typical of adults, but now it became clear to her that her son had his own unique characteristics. The healer explained that Karditzel had an innate ability linked to fire. When his power reached a certain threshold, he felt pain until he balanced it. When his strength peaks, his body can't contain it, and this causes him to get worse. Cheryl felt relieved when she heard the doctor's explanation. First aid was administered, and the young gentleman was now able to rest a bit. The doctor said it was important to give him time to recover to avoid further complications. The maid reassured Cheryl, telling her not to worry too much. She promised to keep an eye on Karditzel's condition and suggested her mistress rest in her room. Cheryl thanked the maid for her concern and, feeling a little better, apologized for disturbing her. She left Karditzel in the maid's care and went to her room. But she still won't be able to relax if he remains under her supervision, so she'll call the maid if she needs any help. She asked the maid to leave her and her son alone so that they could be alone. When the lady heard her son approaching, she immediately asked him if he was okay, as he was making some strange sounds. The boy replied that it hurt, but at the same time said that everything was fine. The lady reassured him that everything would be fine, and that she was with him now. She noticed how he began to cry and call her mom. She was scared when he called her mom for the first time. It was unexpected and unusual for her. She told him that mom was there, and for the first time he called her mom in full, before he only said, Ma. The boy woke up and immediately apologized, explaining that he didn't mean to act like a child. He said he wouldn't do that again and asked her not to hate him. The lady hugged him and assured him that she did not understand why she should hate him, calling him her daughter. She added that she was very glad that he called her mom for the first time. It meant a lot to her. She told him that he didn't need to try to act like a child, because he was already doing what he wanted. The boy called her mom again, and she said yes, assuring him that she wouldn't be afraid if he got hurt. She explained to him that he just needed to rest, as good rest was important for his recovery. And as soon as he feels better, they will be able to go boating, which will bring a lot of joy. The boy agreed and tried to sleep again. But then he asked if she could read him one more story before he fell asleep. Mother replied that he was in pain and hoped that it would not prevent him from sleeping. The boy said that her voice did not bother him at all and that he was ready to listen. She started reading a story, and he immediately began to fall asleep. When she finished, she looked at him and saw that he was already fast asleep. He slept so soundly that it looked really cute. The Duke entered the room and asked why she was still in bed. She was scared when she heard him, because his question frightened her, and her heart almost stopped. She explained that he needed to rest since he had been working all day and was probably very tired. But she also suggested that he might be worried about their son. The gentleman said that the air must be safe and he needed to be sure that the boy was okay. She assured him that he shouldn't worry and that it was just fatigue from working late that was why she came here. He couldn't believe her words and doubted that everything was really so. The lady replied that she was going to stay with her son all night to look after him. However, the Duke immediately suspected that she was up to something, and this alerted him. But the lady assured him that this was not the case at all, and that she was simply caring for her son. The gentleman noted that if she is someone he knows, then her behavior seems strange. He couldn't believe that she could change, even if at first glance it seemed so. But he was sure that people don't change so easily, and so he didn't get up, not understanding where she got such thoughts from. The gentleman claimed that the whole situation arose because Cheryl hated both him and his son, although the reason was much deeper than he thought. Cheryl replied that perhaps that was once the case, but now she loved them. She felt a particularly strong attachment to her son, who became her rock. The gentleman believed that it was precisely because of this love that she reacted so sharply to her son's insult and was unable to restrain herself after hearing a word that humiliated him. He couldn't understand what exactly it was in her soul that caused such anger, not imagining why she would become so angry at the mere mention of his roots and origins. Cheryl noted with a slight smile that the child had nothing to do with it, and her face became a little awkward for a moment, as if she herself felt uncomfortable. The gentleman nodded, agreeing with her that the child really had nothing to do with what was happening, and continued to watch her reaction, waiting for further words. He asked firmly if she could hold his hand, his tone a little tense and his gaze hesitant, as if he hadn't expected such a question from her. The lady, looking at him in surprise, asked why his hands were shaking, but he did not answer, only looked into her eyes, hiding his feelings. He quietly said that it was strange how she could be so cold and repulsive before, and now she calls him by name and is even ready to hold his hand. There was a hint of irony in his voice as he turned to her, suggesting that she might have lost her memory in the accident, and that would explain her behavior. He added that if she had really lost all those memories that had previously hindered her relationship with him, then now everything had become clearer. He claimed that it was precisely for this reason that it became so easy and pleasant to be around her, as if everything had changed and become somehow simpler and brighter. Everything was going great until she made one mistake that shattered the illusion that everything between them could be as he had imagined. She couldn't believe Keanu was really that ill, that his condition was so critical. It seemed her maid Margot had been right in her assumptions. The Duke admitted that if this had not happened, he would never have known how much things had changed, and how much he had not noticed before. He said that only now did he realize how happy he could be when she didn't hate him, when her feelings for him had changed. He started to leave, but there was a strange feeling in his heart that he couldn't leave so easily, and that's when she tried to stop him. But he suddenly turned and hugged her, making her feel that moment when their lives intersected again and everything became a little different. Cheryl was shocked by his actions, but he told her that he fell in love with her smile, which was bright as the sun, and could never forget it. The sound of her whispers, her soft voice, everything that was connected with her, he felt as if it had become a part of him, and now he was attached to her forever. When her memories return, they will no longer be as close as before. Everything will change, and they will lose the harmony they had now. Until that moment, he asked her permission to be selfish, although he understood that his request might sound strange, but he could not restrain his desires. The girl quietly asked him to let her go first, so that everything could calm down a little, and so that she could sort out her feelings before deciding anything. The Duke simply asked for forgiveness, and she replied that it was okay, that everything was fine, and her reaction was not what he expected. The gentleman thought that she had made her final decision, but she smiled and said that if he really wanted it, she would not stop him. She knew that he was a good and caring person, always ready to show his love and kindness. She also realized that all his rudeness actually hid the embarrassment he felt inside. He was worried that she would turn away from him when they returned and the memories would come alive in her mind again. He was afraid that her gaze would become cold and the answer she would give would be too painful for him. The gentleman hugged her, and she replied that even if her memories returned, she would not forget his warmth and care. The gentleman could not understand where she got such softness and sensuality from. She seemed completely different to him. He was afraid that if she continued to speak so softly, he would not be able to come to terms with it if she suddenly changed. The gentleman remarked that it would be difficult for him to cope with her tenderness because now she was so sweet and caring. The lady simply smiled, enjoying the moment. She was pleased to feel his attention and care. He couldn't understand what was so funny, but she just replied that she didn't know herself. He was just too nice. It was the same man who hadn't even looked at her at dinner, and now it all seemed such a strange change. The Duke thought that she would simply forget about it and everything would return to its place. He thought she was just joking, but now he realized that she was serious and understood her feelings. He turned to her, waiting a long time for her answer, and noticed how her smile confirmed his thoughts. She admitted that she had been cold and rude to him, but she hoped that he still loved her despite this. She believed that he still loved her, despite all the difficulties they faced. The gentleman instantly remembered her face and, smiling, said that of course he loved her, despite all their experiences. He realized he had been foolish and told her that he was still in love, despite all his fears and doubts. He knew he could be colder than snow and rougher than stone, but he didn't care because her smile warmed his heart. Her smile warmed his soul, giving him a sense of peace and confidence despite all the difficulties. The lady was a little embarrassed, not understanding what exactly was so romantic in her words, but she was pleased to feel such closeness. The gentleman approached her, pressing his nose against her hair to smell it. This unexpected gesture made her blush, and she felt deeply embarrassed. At that moment, she thought his beauty was so stunning it could drive her crazy. His appearance that day was flawless, and she couldn't take her eyes off him. She admitted to herself that his attractiveness could drive her crazy. He looked so strong today. His presence in the room made her heart beat faster. The girl felt a strange tension, knowing they shouldn't behave like this in front of their son. Their behavior shouldn't have crossed the line. The gentleman smiled at her words, noticing her faltering. He easily noticed her awkwardness, and she felt her face turn even redder. The gentleman joked that she was clearly shy. She tried to justify herself, but his smile only increased her embarrassment. She wanted this moment to pass as quickly as possible. The lady was alarmed by his words and asked him to step back because she needed some space to calm down. She couldn't stand being in such close proximity. She reminded him that he hadn't come here to talk to her but to visit their son. Everything that was happening seemed out of place in this setting. The gentleman confirmed that he had indeed come to visit his son, but his desire to see his wife was no less important. He couldn't ignore her presence. However, he added that he was here not only for his son, but also because he hadn't seen her in a long time. His desire to see her was strong, and it was far from accidental. The lady was surprised by his behavior, as he was rarely so attentive and kind. Usually he was busy and ignored her when she arrived. The gentleman always seemed absorbed in his work when she entered the room. He never looked at her, even when she tried to get his attention. He asked her if his behavior was truly bothering her, as she had never complained about it before. He expected her reaction to be calmer. He admitted that he was always glad to see her, but he knew she couldn't stay in his office forever. He was afraid she would leave and perhaps never return. He expressed his desire to enjoy her beauty while he could. She asked him not to look at her as if all the love was in his eyes. She thought he must be afraid because his words sounded so serious. His gaze was full of fear that she couldn't ignore. The gentleman continued to look at her with such anxiety that she sensed how much he feared losing her. He couldn't hide his emotions and regrets. He thought that when she started looking at him with the stain again, he wouldn't be able to bear it. He wanted to be near her, even if it meant danger to his heart. The gentleman smiled, assuring her that he would always love her. He always felt this love, despite everything that was happening around him. His words were sincere. The lady blushed again and asked him why he was saying such things and why the romance had arisen in the room where their son was. It was all too unexpected. She couldn't express all her emotions in words. Her indignation was too strong, and she felt herself blushing more and more. She was easily embarrassed. She needed to collect her thoughts, calm down, and figure out what to do next. First, she needed to somehow kick her husband out to restore peace. She said that was enough for today. She needed to take care of her son. But her husband suggested that they tackle the matter together, rather than separately. The gentleman replied that he had too much to do to devote time to this, since all his duties required attention, and therefore he had no time for such questions. However, he noted that he could ask Aida to help him with his affairs. He was confident she could handle it and help him free himself to focus on his family. She, of course, fervently hoped that the boy would wake up and help her. At that moment, she felt as if she lacked the strength, and her mother's heart might stop beating. Suddenly, she heard the boy quietly groaning in his sleep, as if something was bothering him and he was experiencing discomfort. She realized the time had come, and she needed to act. She approached his bed and gently asked if he was okay. Only then did she realize he was clearly in need of rest and that she needed to be there. The boy replied that he felt dizzy and that something was wrong. His face was pale, and she immediately realized that his illness was getting worse. He also complained of a high temperature. The woman examined him, noting that his body was still hot and that she needed to be patient to improve his condition. She hurried to apply a compress to his forehead, hoping it would bring relief. She believed that given his condition, he would soon feel a little better. The boy said he felt a little better, but found the noise in the room too disturbing. He asked for some silence so he could focus on his well-being. He pointed at his father and said that his loud talking was making his headache worse. He wanted everything around him to be quieter so he could bear the pain more easily. The boy said he'd feel more comfortable being with his mother and that he didn't need his father around. He wanted to be cared for and comforted by those he trusted. The lady bowed her head, realizing these words couldn't help but hurt her husband. It was hard to hear that the boy had chosen her over him, but she knew it was temporary. She apologized to her husband, saying it was better for her and her son to be alone. It was difficult, but she felt the boy needed her support and peace. My husband said he, too, understood how to ease the pain, having experienced something similar at his age. He was confident he knew what to do to help his son. If he remained a saint, everything should improve. But the boy screamed, claiming it was too loud, and began hugging his mother, trying to find comfort in her embrace. He couldn't understand why his behavior was so strange, why he continued to behave like this despite all the commotion and sounds around him. Cardi complained that her father was too loud, and that her ears were ringing so loudly that she thought her head was going to explode from the noise. The master was surprised by the behavior of his heir, not expecting that he would show such indecent impudence and behave so restlessly. Sheriel suggested that he go and rest, assuring him that she could handle her son herself and would be able to comfort him by dealing with his anxiety. He tried to object, but the lady asked him to be quieter, explaining that her son needed some peace to calm down and feel better. The Duke was upset, but realized that he would have to leave them and go away so as not to create unnecessary disturbance and not disturb the mother and son. He told her not to worry too much and wished her good night, hoping that everything would work out and the situation would improve soon. The next day, the lady could not concentrate on work, as her thoughts kept returning to the events of the previous night, and she could not understand what was happening. The maid noticed that her mistress looked tired and suggested that she take a little nap to restore her strength, but she refused, deciding to continue working. Sheriel replied that she couldn't afford to take a break because she had to finish her work or she wouldn't be able to fulfill all her obligations. The maid noticed that sitting all night with the young master was also her duty, and the mistress decided to ask her opinion about her son's condition. The lady confirmed that she eventually had to retire to her office to concentrate on work as the day had proved too busy for her. At this point, the young master's strength returned, and he dined with a hearty appetite, which testified to his gradual recovery. Sheriel noticed that her son was getting stronger and was pleased to see him recovering despite his fatigue and weakness. She couldn't imagine what she would do if he didn't even want to eat, as that would be another big worry for her. The maid assured her that there was no need to worry, as they were doing everything they could to help and trying their best to make sure everything was okay. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door, and the maid offered to check who it was, as they were not expecting any visits at that moment. The lady was astonished to see her husband come to her. He was the first person to visit her, and her heart skipped a beat in surprise. It all stemmed from the events of the previous night. The maid reported that a young gentleman had come to see the mistress, and this brought new questions and worries into their home. The lady was surprised when she saw him. It was unexpected for her because she hadn't expected him to appear at that moment. His appearance was a real surprise for her. She noticed that he hadn't fully recovered yet. He remained seated, as his condition still prevented him from making many movements. However, she was glad he didn't have a fever and hoped he wouldn't have difficulty walking. He said he felt much better, everything was fine, and the pain was gone. He said he felt much better, which made her happy, as his recovery was improving. He admitted he simply missed them. The mistress and her maid were delighted by his words. This brought smiles and joy to their faces, as his return had been long awaited. Her son had recently become very sensitive, which the maid also noticed. She said she had completely forgotten that tea and cake were supposed to be made. This amusing misunderstanding brought laughter to everyone. The boy approached his mother and said he was curious if she was busy right now. He showed interest in her activities, wanting to spend time with her, not understanding how she would work or what exactly she was doing. He asked if he could stay right there and then. His eyes filled with hope. He waited for permission to remain in the room and be with her while she went about her business. It was simply Milana, who wished she could have recorded it on video. She wanted to capture this moment to preserve it in her memory, as she knew this day was special for everyone. The lady said her job wasn't the most interesting, and he should understand that. She explained that her responsibilities demanded attention, but she still tried to find time to communicate with him, even though work still came first. The boy replied that it didn't matter to him at all. He was willing to wait if necessary to be with his mother. He wasn't worried. He knew everything could be done later. He said he'd just sit next to her while she worked. He didn't demand her attention. He just wanted to be there, sitting quietly and observing her work, feeling the calm of her presence. The lady said he could wait a little. She promised to try to finish her work quickly. Once she finished, they could spend time together, and she would read him a story. At that moment, it began to rain, and her thoughts wandered slightly. She noticed the sound of the rain, which was beginning just when she had planned to finish her chores and spend time with her son. Rain had become more frequent lately, which could mean the rainy season was about to begin. That time of year was approaching, and she was already looking forward to cozy moments indoors when the rain was outside. She was a little surprised, as she had planned to go boating with her son. However, the rain had interrupted their plans, and now they had to reschedule them for an earlier time, which left her a little disappointed. The boy said he wasn't opposed to it, but his dad wouldn't go. He noticed his father showed no interest in such outings, which struck him as odd, as his father was always busy and avoided such activities. Afterwards, the gentleman came up and said he'd had a strange feeling that something was happening behind him. He felt something had changed, and that tension had arisen at that moment. The lady was frightened and didn't understand what exactly was happening. She couldn't figure out what had happened or why the gentleman had said that. Questions arose in her mind that she couldn't immediately explain. He explained that the door was open and he decided to peek in on his way to the office. He noticed his son was nearby and expressed his opinion on what was happening. His primary focus, however, remained on his wife. He said he was ready to go with them anytime she wasn't busy. He was ready to support her, to be there if she allowed it, and this gave him a sense of calm and confidence in his feelings. The boy was a little angry as he didn't want to leave with his father. He felt the plan wasn't right for him, and his displeasure showed in the way he reacted to the proposal. He told his mother he wanted to sit next to her when they rode in the carriage. He expected his wish to be heard, and he would be able to be with her at that moment, to feel her support. Of course, she agreed. The gentleman said he would sit next to her because, despite everything, they weren't husband and wife, as is customary in families, but simply people. However, the boy began to say that his father was busy, and his mother often preferred to be near him, and therefore he would be there, as always. The gentleman noted that he needs to spend more time with his wife, because she is first and foremost his wife, not the mother of his son, and that is a priority. She couldn't understand that this was actually a childish squabble between a father and son, who were ultimately dividing her, trying to get attention. She would very much like for a friendship to be established between them, for everything to be without unnecessary words, but it seemed that counting on this would be useless. She remembered it, and even felt a small spark of light appear inside, almost like a memory of something important. Standing up, she declared that arguing was bad and that they would get nowhere if they continued like this. Something had to be done. She suggested they both step outside for a while. Time, she believed, would help cool their hot heads and help them find a path to understanding. The husband was terrified, and the boyfriend didn't understand what was happening either. Their relationship seemed so confusing and difficult to understand. She insisted that they be quiet and not ask unnecessary questions. She also added that Kian should stop acting like a child in front of his son. Her husband tried to justify himself, but she interrupted him, asking him to be quiet. She didn't want to listen to his excuses anymore at this point. She stated that he was the father and could not understand how anyone could behave like that towards their own child. It was unacceptable. She also addressed the boy, telling him that he shouldn't speak so rudely to his father. Parents must be respected, even if they make mistakes too. She emphasized that if his father wants to spend time with him, he shouldn't avoid him. The boy needs to understand that mutual respect is important. The boy realized his mistake and, feeling guilty, asked his mother for forgiveness, promising not to do it again and hoping that she would not leave him. He declared that he wouldn't do it again and apologized, asking his mother not to leave him. He was afraid of losing her because of this argument. Mother replied that she never intended to abandon him. However, when she and Dad quarrel, it's important that they be given a little punishment for their behavior. The gentleman and his son didn't understand what punishment she was talking about. They both couldn't imagine how they could remedy the situation in this way. The mother explained that they would walk together, holding hands, to show that they were a family and could solve all problems with love and support. It was still cold outside, so they decided to walk through the corridors of the mansion. The gentleman said there were certain limits to what was permissible in this case. Mother noticed that she and Dad were indeed very close, and this was true despite all the difficulties they were going through at that time. The lady declared that they must leave her room and not return until they had made her decision. They needed time to think. She asked her maid, Margot, to escort the guests out so they could think about their actions and decisions. Let them wait a bit. Both were upset, and the master decided to take his son in his arms, comforting him despite all the problems that had arisen between them. He noted that, Unfortunately, they have no other choice. They must hold on tightly to each other because that's the only way to overcome all difficulties. The boy said that he agreed with the proposal, but clarified that it was his mother's request, and only then did he agree. He asked the maid to watch what was happening closely, and then be sure to tell his mother everything as soon as possible. The maid promised to fulfill the boy's request and be attentive, promising her mistress that everything would be done. They clasped hands tightly. Everyone present was shocked to see the Duke and the young master together. They had never seen them together before, and it came as a surprise. Some have already begun to suspect that the lady and the young master have become much closer to each other recently than before. The Duke was stunned when he noticed the maid's gaze fixed on him. The boy sensed that this was all about him. The Duke couldn't understand why the boy was blaming him. He believed that if he hadn't been so capricious, nothing would have happened, and everything would have been different. The boy noted that if he had given up the seat next to his mother, then the punishment would probably have been avoided and everything could have ended peacefully. The father gave no answer, and the boy began to think that he should have said at least something, but nothing followed. It wasn't surprising to expect jealousy from such a young child, especially considering his wife was clearly angry with him. Therefore, the Duke admitted his guilt and said that he was indeed wrong in this situation, although it upset him greatly. The boy was stunned by his father's apology. The master, however, remarked that he couldn't understand why the boy had suddenly fallen silent without saying another word. The boy said he shouldn't forget that his mother still loved him more. This was obvious to him despite her apologies. The gentleman replied that even if this was so, he should not forget that they were still husband and wife and should support each other. The Duke said the boy still had much to understand. The world around him was far from as simple as he imagined. The maid noticed that her mistress's plan to get closer to her husband seemed to be paying off. They had become closer. When they returned, the maid felt uneasy. She noticed that her mistress looked unusually tired, as if something was wrong. The maid was worried, as her mistress was clearly overtired. She looked so tired that she couldn't stand on her feet at all. When they came closer, they saw that the lady was not simply leaning on the table, but rather was sleeping, completely oblivious to their presence. The Duke said that it would probably be better to carry the lady to her bedroom so that she could rest in comfortable conditions and regain her strength. The maid suggested calling the butler for help so that he could help carry the lady and not let her experience unnecessary inconvenience. However, the gentleman decided he didn't need to ask for help. He would take responsibility for carrying the lady himself, ensuring everything was done quickly. He noted that his wife turned out to be surprisingly easy, and this came as a surprise to him, as he expected more tension. The maid noticed that her mistress had lost weight and was now truly suffering. She was concerned about this, believing she needed to watch her diet. The Duke said he did not wish the lady to become ill again, but he was not against the idea of them taking care of her health and dinner. The maid noticed that the mistress was worried about him and was constantly wondering if he was eating properly. The gentleman was surprised and asked if his wife was really so worried about him. The maid replied that she had often told her mistress that it must be very lonely for the Duke to eat alone. And also, the lady so much wants to have lunch with him, but because of this incident, she is afraid to ask. The maid also added that she said it by accident, since the mistress asked her not to talk about it. The Duke said there was nothing to worry about, and he would pretend he hadn't heard anything. The main thing here is something else. Did his wife say the same thing? The maid remarked that, of course, she would not lie to the Duke's face. She thought that he would go to the mistress's bedroom, and at that time she would spend a lot of time with the master in his room. The boy, because he needs to see him off, and also because he wants to go with his father. Mom was with him all night. Now it's his turn to watch her. The Duke said that most likely the boy would not listen to him anyway, even if he told him to go to his room. The boy said that he knew him well, and he smiled. She's even more beautiful sleeping. The boy sat next to her and said that Mom was always beautiful, and also that she is very kind to the servants. The Duke smiled and said that she never gets angry at those who are kind to her. The boy noticed that she knew what kind of sweets he liked. He added that when she reads fairy tales, her voice sounds like that of an angel. The Duke said that there was no other way to put it. Her smile was truly angelic. The lady was already really wanting these compliments to end when she heard all this and blushed. She was glad that they had become closer, but now she was ready to die of shame. She didn't know what to do. Continue lying there and pretending to be asleep, or open her eyes. Still, she decided to pretend to be asleep, but suddenly she felt silence. and thought that they had left, even if she had heard their steps. Finally, she decided to open her eyes and saw both her husband and the boy in front of her. One asked how she was feeling. The lady did not understand when they managed to get here. She fell asleep and did not even notice how they returned. The boy said that she would not deceive them. The lady noted that they had just been arguing, and she accepts it before we even had time to become friends. The Duke, who asked me if this was what she wanted. The boy said that it was her own fault. Now they get along. The lady said that praising someone while he is sleeping is very embarrassing. But the boy didn't understand how he could restrain himself when he had such a good mother. She changed her and noted that she was probably tired, so she needed to rest. And she also said that he would like to sleep with her daughter. Mother said that, of course, no problem, and he could move closer to her personally as it would be more comfortable. Well, he was glad, because now it was time to go back to his room, madam. What did she say that he could not keep Dad at a distance? The boy said that it's not that he doesn't like his dad, it's just that he loves his mom much more and wants to hear that she loves him more than anyone else. She only said that he didn't even know about it. The boy was choking, saying something, just silently looking at it. The Duke asked if everything would be okay if he stayed too. The boy said that since his mother wants them to get along, he allows it. The father lay down with them. The boy didn't want it to be so close. Over time, the boy fell asleep so quickly that he was so cute. The Duke remarked that lying in plasticine when you find out that she loves him is like a dream come true. He's wanted this for so long that she can't even imagine it. Sometimes it even seems to him that everything that is happening is an excruciatingly difficult punishment. The mistress does not rise. Why bother with this worry when there is a sweet little girl next to them? She said that when the weather in the glass is golden, the three of them will sail on a boat. After this, the Duke hugged his son and wife even tighter, and they fell asleep. She was making good on her promise this time. The Duke's assistant remarked that the Duke was unusually cheerful today. The gentleman said that if there is time for chatting, then he will also have time for paperwork. The guy said that time was still ticking, that's why she didn't understand where the gentleman was rushing to. I told him that if he doesn't work, he can find time for something else. The guy put it down, trying to understand what the gentleman was talking about the expedition. But they only went there recently. The land should be fine for some time. But perhaps he and his wife would like to go somewhere. Someone knocked on the door and it was the lady. She asked if he was busy because she wanted to discuss something with him. The boy noticed that his dad seemed busy, so he suggested coming back later. But the Duke stopped them, seemed to be trying to settle everything, and said that they could pass. The lady asked if he remembered her promise, and the Duke confirmed it. She would like to go boating while it is not too hot. The Duke said he could only spare a day next week. There is no need to worry about the location, because he has already arranged everything. The lady was glad that he had also prepared, and noted that he was trying very hard. After that, she smiled, thanked him, and said that she was looking forward to it, and added that the food should also be prepared. The assistant said that a holiday alone with his family should bring the Duke happiness, since sleepless nights had left him very tired. A couple of days later, the maid reported that the weather was very good. The lady hoped that they had not forgotten anything. The maid said that she had put all the food she had requested into this basket. The lady was grateful, but it was a little hard for her. The boy turned to his mother, and she told him not to run like that because he might fall. The boy replied that he wanted to be near her, and the lady smiled, saying that he was very sweet. She hoped that he would sit in the carriage next to his father, but the boy said that he wanted to be next to her. As he gets older, he can't hide his emotions at all, and it's very cute. Meanwhile, the Duke approached, and she thought that he had been waiting for her for too long. He noticed that her dress suited her very well. The lady thought it was truly beautiful and remarked that such dresses were popular now. He told her that she needed to take care to protect her skin, otherwise she might get sunburned. He added that he would do this later, while they were getting into the carriage. The lady was surprised. He spoke with such a red face that she did not know what to think. The boy said that they needed to get to the carriage quickly because he was hot. The lady realized that he was still too small, and the Duke said that he had cast a cooling spell on him so that he would not be hot during the journey. He picked him up and noticed that she had blushed too. And she said that she better tie herself into the carriage. The lady was about to go crazy. She wants him to stop smiling like that because he is already handsome, and with a smile he becomes even more handsome. The boy asked if they would definitely find her here at his father's, since there was only grass around. The Duke said they would have to get off and walk a bit. Luckily, the weather was fine. The coachman announced that they had already arrived, and the Duke said that he would go out first. He told the lady to go down carefully and offered her his hand. The boy also took his hand and thanked him. The lady said that he was simply jealous. Of course, she said this in a whisper. The Duke took him in his arms and said that he knew about it himself. The boy screamed for his father to let him go because he wanted to walk hand in hand with his mother. His father said he would carry him to the lake, and if he got tired before they got there, he wouldn't be able to enjoy the boat ride. The lady said it was wonderful to have such a strong father. The coachman wished them a safe ride and promised to return at sunset. I think he took the basket and said that they could go now. The lady also asked how far they had to go. He's so close now that my heart is pounding. The Duke said they were far away and he could carry her. She said that it was not necessary because she was not baby, and she was heavy, so it would be difficult for him. The gentleman said that if she was worried about him, then there was no need to think that way. He could cope. The boy told his father to walk faster. The lady suggested they walk more often like this. It was very pleasant even just to watch them. The boy was smiling. He noted that Dad would call, so it wouldn't happen again. Dad said they had already arrived. The boy asked his mother to look in that direction. The woman was surprised. Such a view, she didn't know that there, in that place, we have such a place. The Duke then said that he had always wanted to come here with her, and now, at last, she had kept her promise. Sheriel wasn't quite sure what promise he was talking about, so she decided to ask again to clarify the situation. The Duke, for his part, admitted that he himself hadn't expected her to have a child. It was an unexpected turn of events. He added that the child was likely the result of his promise to her immediately after their wedding. That's exactly what happened. Sheriel admitted that she really liked it. The fact that he kept his word seemed especially meaningful and very sweet on his part. The Duke, smiling, replied that he was ready to do everything necessary for her so that she would be content and happy without doubting her decision.